smell reaches Matthias Corvane before anything else. That particular scent of ancient parchment mixed with promethium preservative and the faint metallic tang of climate control systems working overtime to protect documents that predate the Horus heresy. The Imperial archives of Terra sprawl beneath the surface of humanity's cradle world, kilometers of reinforced chambers carved from bedrock that has witnessed the entirety of human history. Down here, 10,000 years of accumulated records rest in climate-controlled darkness, tended by servitors whose organic components ceased remembering their former lives millennia ago. Matthias adjusts his rebreather as he descends the final flight of stairs into sub-level 17, where documents from the Great Crusade era await cataloguing. The assignment seems straightforward enough. Routine archival work documenting the expansion period before the galaxy burned. His credentials as a certified Remembrancer, granted after 2 decades of faithful service recording Imperial victories, grant him access to materials that most citizens could never glimpse. The responsibility weighs heavier than the data slate he carries, a constant reminder that he serves not just as historian, but as guardian of carefully curated truth. The chamber reveals itself as his eyes adjust to the dim amber lighting. Rows of storage units stretch into darkness, each containing sealed cases marked with high Gothic inscriptions denoting their contents and clearance levels. A servitor approaches with mechanical precision, its remaining human eye filmed over with cataracts, its augmetic replacements clicking softly as they focus on him. The thing extends a parchment manifest without ceremony, the list of materials assigned for his review today. Most entries prove unremarkable. Campaign reports from compliant worlds, supply manifests from Forge worlds, long since fallen to Xenos incursion, personnel rosters for army units disbanded after the heresy. Standard fare for a Remembrancer tasked with organizing the scattered records of mankind's greatest military expansion. Matthias settles at an analysis desk, its surface scattered with authentication equipment and reference materials, and begins the methodical work of documentation. Hours pass in the peculiar timelessness of archive work. The servitors move through their program routines. Temperature sensors chirp softly at regular intervals, and Matthias's stylus scratches across data slate after data slate. He works through campaign reports from the 81st Expeditionary Fleet, documenting their conquest of the Talasar sector. The language carries that particular flavor of early Crusade optimism. Humanity united under the Emperor's banner, pushing back the darkness, claiming its birthright among the stars. Reading these accounts, written before anyone knew what Horus would become, before the word heresy had its current weight, creates a strange melancholy. The discrepancy catches his attention during the 4th hour of work. A personnel manifest from the 119th Expeditionary Fleet lists command structure for multiple Space Marine contingents. The entries follow standard format. 1st Legion detachment under Captain such and such. 7th Legion reconnaissance elements commanded by so and so. 13th Legion tactical support coordinated through someone else. But between the 1st and 3rd Legion entries, the formatting shifts. A gap exists where text should be, marked only by a reference number that leads nowhere. Matthias frowns, assuming a transcription error. Such things happen occasionally with documents this ancient, digital corruption or physical damage creating gaps in records. He makes a note to cross-reference with other sources and continues working. But the pattern repeats. Another manifest from a different fleet, shows similar gaps. Command rosters that skip from 1st to 3rd Legion without explanation. Tactical assessments that reference integrated Legion support without specifying which legions participated. The gaps appear with increasing frequency as he works through the materials, always in the same places, between 1st and 3rd, between 10th and 12th. Sometimes the formatting preserves a space where text once existed, leaving conspicuous blanks like missing teeth in an ancient skull. Other times, the text simply flows from one entry to the next without acknowledgement that anything should exist between them. But the reference numbers persist, pointing to documents that are not included in his assigned materials. Curiosity, that dangerous quality in a remembrancer, begins to gnaw at Matthias. He requests additional materials from the servitor, cross-referencing document codes to track down the missing information. The servitor processes his request with mechanical efficiency, disappearing into the stacks for nearly an hour before returning empty-handed. The data slate it carries displays a simple message in High Gothic: materials not available for review, clearance level insufficient. That should have been the end of it. Matthias possesses considerable access for a civilian historian, but certain materials naturally remain restricted. Sensitive tactical information, personal correspondence of Primarchs, intelligence reports on ongoing Xenos threats, all reasonable exclusions. He should have noted the gaps, documented them in his report, and moved on to the next assignment. The Imperium contains millions of bureaucratic mysteries, countless small inconsistencies in 10,000 years of accumulated records. Not everything demands investigation, but something about these particular gaps troubles him. The pattern feels too deliberate, too consistent. Documents from different fleets, different time periods, different theaters of the Great Crusade, all showing similar formatting anomalies in precisely the same locations. As if someone had gone through the entire archive, systematically removing specific references while leaving just enough evidence to show that something once existed there. The workday ends as servitors begin their nightly preservation routines, spraying specialized compounds across storage units and adjusting environmental controls for optimal long-term preservation. Matthias ascends from sub-level 17 with his data slates, emerging into the eternal twilight of Terra's surface, where the planet's atmosphere filters the sun into a perpetual golden haze. Millions live and die on humanity's cradle world without ever seeing true darkness or true daylight, existence measured in the amber glow of artificial illumination and the filtered radiance of a sun struggling to penetrate atmospheric pollution accumulated across millennia. His quarters in the Remembrancer's halls occupy a modest space, a single room with a sleeping alcove, work desk, and small shrine to the Emperor. Simple accommodations for simple needs, appropriate for someone whose wealth exists in knowledge rather than material possessions. Matthias sets his data slates on the desk and prepares a modest evening meal, but his thoughts keep returning to those gaps in the archive. 20 years of service as a remembrancer has taught him that history is never simple. The official narratives presented to the masses undergo careful curation, emphasizing certain elements while downplaying others. This is not deception, but necessary simplification. Most citizens lack the context to understand the full complexity of Imperial history, and burdening them with unnecessary detail serves no purpose. His role exists to document the true history, the complete record preserved for future historians and administrators who might need to reference past events. But even within that role, he has learned that certain truths remain more carefully guarded than others. He eats mechanically, barely tasting the ration paste that serves as sustenance, his mind working through the problem. 20 Space Marine legions fought in the Great Crusade, each founded from the gene seed of one of the Emperor's 20 Primarchs. The Horus heresy split those legions, 9 remaining loyal, 9 turning traitor. That leaves 2 unaccounted for in the simple arithmetic, except no official records discuss this discrepancy. The numbering simply skips from 1st to 3rd, from 10th to 12th, with no explanation offered or apparently needed. Could those 2 legions have been destroyed early in the crusade, lost to some catastrophic engagement that prompted their dissolution and the redistribution of their remaining warriors to other legions? That would explain why later campaign records show no reference to them. But it wouldn't explain why early crusade documents had been redacted. If the legions simply fell in battle, their sacrifice should be commemorated, their memory preserved as example and inspiration, like the Istvan massacre or Prospero's burning. Unless whatever happened to them was deemed unworthy of commemoration. Unless their fate represented something the Imperium preferred to forget rather than remember. Sleep proves elusive. Matthias lies in his alcove staring at the ceiling where someone long ago scratched devotional prayers into the plasteel. The words blur in his vision as exhaustion wore with curiosity. He should let this go. He should document the gaps, note the restricted access in his report, and move on to the next assignment like a dutiful servant of the Imperium. The archives contain 10,000 years of mysteries. Not every question demands an answer, but as consciousness finally fades, his last thought circles back to those gaps in the manifest, those deliberately preserved spaces where legion designations should appear. Someone had gone to considerable effort to remove that information. Someone with authority and resources had decided that whatever those 2 legions represented, their memory posed enough danger to warrant systematic historical revision. And Matthias Corvane, 20-year veteran of the Remembrancer Order, cannot shake the feeling that understanding why might be more important than any document he has ever catalogued. Morning arrives on Terra, as it always does, with automated systems gradually increasing ambient light levels to simulate a dawn that the planet's atmosphere barely allows. Matthias wakes to his chronometer's soft chime, the device counting time in a world where natural cycles have long since ceased to matter. He performs his morning ablutions mechanically, recites the litany of the historian to the small emperor shrine in his quarters, and prepares for another day in the archives. The ritual of routine provides comfort, the familiar patterns that mark a life dedicated to service. But as he descends once more into sub-level 17, data slates in hand, his thoughts remain fixed on yesterday's discoveries. The gaps in the records persist in his mind like a phantom limb, a missing piece whose absence draws more attention than its presence ever would have. Today's assignment takes him deeper into Great Crusade documentation, focusing on the period before Horus's discovery on Chthoniya. These earlier records carry a different quality, written when the Emperor himself still led the crusade personally, before he returned to Terra to pursue the Webway project. The campaigns from this period show remarkable uniformity in their success. World after world brought into compliance through a combination of diplomacy, intimidation, and when necessary, overwhelming military force. But the same pattern appears. Fleet manifests that skip Legion numbers, command rosters missing entries, after-action reports that reference coordinated Legion support without identifying which legions provided that support. The gaps occur with such consistency that Matthias begins to wonder how he never noticed them in his previous archival work, perhaps because he'd never looked for them. The human mind possesses a remarkable capacity to simply accept what it sees, to not question gaps that present themselves with enough authority. He begins documenting every instance, creating his own cross-reference database on a private data slate that never connects to the archive's main network. The work proves painstaking, requiring careful attention to maintain his regular documentation duties while secretly cataloguing these anomalies. By midday, his private list contains over 50 separate instances spanning a 20-year period of the Great Crusade. The frequency of gaps increases in the earlier records, tapering off around the time the Emperor returned to Terra. This suggests whatever happened to the missing legions occurred relatively early in the Crusade, with the redaction effort intensifying for later documents as if to gradually erase their memory from history. The systematic nature of the deletion implies tremendous resources devoted to the task, not just removing references from Terra's archives, but presumably from every archive across the Imperium. During his meal break, taken in the small chamber the archives provide for staff sustenance, Matthias attempts a different approach. The servitors who tend the archives possess limited cognitive function, their organic components reduced to base operations by extensive augmentation and neural conditioning. But they retain programmed knowledge of the archive's organization, capable of locating specific document types or time periods on command. He addresses one of the servitors, careful to keep his tone neutral, as if making a routine inquiry. The data slate he holds displays a list of personnel rosters from various expeditionary fleets during the early Crusade period. He asks the servitor if any documents exist detailing the Second Legion's disposition during specific campaigns. The servitor's remaining organic eye regards him with glassy incomprehension. Its augmetic systems process the query, cross-referencing against archive indices. The response comes in the flat, emotionless monotone of its Vox grill. No records exist matching specified parameters. Matthias tries again, this time asking about the 11th Legion. The servitor produces the same response. He varies his approach, requesting information about any legions operating in specific sectors during specific timeframes. The servitor provides data on 1st, 3rd, 4th, and subsequent legions, but for 2nd and 11th, it maintains the same response. No records exist. This proves significant. The absence of records differs from records being restricted. If documents existed but remained classified above his access level, the servitor would indicate that materials existed but could not be provided. Instead, the archive's indexing system appears to have no knowledge that such documents ever existed. Either they were removed so thoroughly that even the catalog entries vanished, or the indexing system itself has been modified to deny their existence. The afternoon brings a new development. As Matthias works through a batch of tactical assessments from the 57th Expeditionary Fleet, he discovers a document that somehow escaped redaction. A planning memorandum discussing fleet composition for an upcoming compliance action references forced disposition, including elements from 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th Legions. The mention appears casually, without elaboration. as if the presence of Second Legion forces required no special explanation. His hands tremble slightly as he saves an authenticated copy to his personal slate before someone notices the oversight. The document proves that the Second Legion existed, that they fought in the Great Crusade, that their presence was considered unremarkable enough to merit only passing mention in routine operational planning. But more importantly, it demonstrates that the gaps he has been documenting represent actual deletion rather than filing errors or corruption. Someone had gone through the archives methodically removing every reference to specific legions. The question becomes, why? Space Marine legions falling in battle, even catastrophically, did not result in historical erasure. The Thousand Suns' near extinction on Prospero remained documented. The Istvan drop site massacre that shattered 3 legions survived in painful detail. The Death Guard's transformation through plague warfare during the heresy earned extensive documentation. Whatever befell the Second and 11th legions represented something different, something the Imperium deemed not merely tragic, but dangerous to remember. As the workday concludes and servitors begin their preservation routines, Matthias makes a decision that will change everything. Rather than ascending to the surface, he lingers in a side chamber, pretending to complete final documentation, while the other archivists depart. The servitors pay him no attention, following their program routines with mechanical precision. When the last human presence exits sub-level 17, he finds himself alone with 10,000 years of carefully curated history. The archives maintain minimal security during evening hours. Few would dare steal from this place, and fewer still would know what documents held value worth theft. The true protection comes not from guards, but from the sheer volume of material and the obscure indexing systems required to locate anything specific. Without proper credentials and knowledge, an intruder could spend years searching for particular documents. But Matthias possesses both credentials and knowledge. He knows the archive's organization, understands its indexing methodology, and carries authorization that grants him access to areas where most citizens would face immediate execution for trespassing. He moves through the stacks with purpose, following document reference numbers that appeared in his day's work, but led to materials marked as unavailable. The restricted materials occupy a separate section, sealed behind reinforced doors, marked with warnings in High Gothic about appropriate clearance levels. His credentials open the outer doors, but an inner chamber requires additional authorization he does not possess. Through the armored glass viewport, he can see storage units marked with reference numbers matching some of the gaps in his documentation. Frustration wars with caution. He has already crossed lines by remaining in the archives after hours, by pursuing this investigation beyond official duties. Actually bypassing security to access restricted materials would constitute a far more serious transgression. The punishment for unauthorized access to classified documents could range from reassignment to more unpleasant fates, depending on what authorities decided his true intentions were. But those documents lie mere meters away. Materials that might explain the gaps, that might reveal what happened to 2 entire Space Marine legions. The knowledge pulls at him like a physical force, curiosity transformed into something approaching compulsion. Before rational thought can intervene, his hands work at the access panel beside the inner chamber door. His credentials won't open it, but the panel's construction dates from the Great Crusade era. before the Mechanicus introduced more sophisticated security measures. The lock mechanism relies on relatively simple authentication protocols. Relatively simple if one possesses technical knowledge and willingness to bypass Imperial security systems. The door opens with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, temperature-controlled darkness preserves documents too sensitive for general archival access. Matthias's hands shake as he enters, very aware that he has just committed what the Inquisition would likely classify as a capital offense. But he has come too far to stop now. The questions that began as professional curiosity have transformed into something more dangerous. A need to know that overrides the caution that has governed his career. The storage units inside contain materials organized by clearance level rather than chronological sequence. He scans reference numbers, finding the codes that corresponded to gaps in the main archive. His authorization grants him access to open the units themselves, even if he should not be in this chamber. The Imperium's security protocols sometimes contain such contradictions, layers of restriction that assume anyone reaching this point would possess proper clearance. The documents he withdraws make his breath catch. Personnel rosters for the Second Legion, command structure from company level to chapter organization, battle honors dating from the earliest years of the Great Crusade, casualty reports showing attrition rates comparable to other legions. Everything one would expect from standard documentation of a Space Marine Legion's operations. But the dates stop abruptly. The most recent document in the collection comes from approximately 60 years into the Great Crusade. After that, nothing. No final battle report. No memorial of their sacrifice, no explanation for why a legion that had been fighting across hundreds of worlds simply ceased to exist in Imperial records. He finds similar documentation for the 11th Legion, operational records spanning decades, then abrupt termination at approximately the same point in the Crusade timeline. The final entries make no reference to catastrophic losses or impending doom. These legions had simply stopped and then been systematically erased from history. Matthias copies what he can to his personal data slate, working quickly while listening for any indication of servitor approach. His heart hammers against his ribs, adrenaline sharpening his senses to painful clarity. He has now committed multiple violations of Imperial law, from unauthorized access to classified materials to copying restricted documents. The weight of his action settles like lead in his stomach. But as he prepares to leave, one final document catches his attention. A single parchment, sealed in preservation material, bearing handwritten text in a script he recognizes from other documents attributed to the Emperor himself. The message contains only a few lines in High Gothic, the formal language of Imperial administration. Let no record remain. Let no memory persist. They are lost, and better lost than found. This is my will, and it shall be done. The signature bears the Imperial Aquila seal, authentication that places this order at the highest possible level of authority. Matthias stares at the parchment, his earlier theories collapsing under the weight of this revelation. The Second and 11th Legions had not simply fallen in battle. They had been deliberately removed from history by the Emperor's own command, not merely forgotten, but actively erased. Their memory deemed too dangerous to preserve even in restricted archives. What could Space Marines, the Emperor's own gene-forged sons, have done to warrant such treatment? The question follows him as he carefully returns documents to their storage units, as he exits the restricted chamber with hands still shaking. As he ascends from sub-level 17 into Terra's eternal twilight, the answer he suspects lies somewhere deeper in the archives. And despite every rational voice screaming that he should stop this investigation, that he should forget what he has learned and return to his assigned duties, Matthias Corvane knows he cannot let this go. The Emperor himself had ordered these legions erased from history, which meant their fate must have been terrible beyond imagining, and Matthias needs to understand why. Sleep comes in fragments that night, Matthias's mind churning through implications of what he has discovered. The Emperor's own hand in the erasure elevates this beyond bureaucratic oversight or military censorship. This represents deliberate historical revision at the highest level, implemented with resources that could span the entire Imperium. The scale staggers him. Not just removing documents from Terra's archives, but presumably every archive on every world, every personal account, every mention in the vast databanks of the Mechanicus. How does one erase something that completely? And perhaps more importantly, why? He rises before the automated lighting systems initiate dawn simulation, unable to remain in the uncomfortable half-sleep that has plagued him through the night. The shrine in his quarters draws him, and he kneels before the small idol of the Emperor, reciting the prayers taught to every child of the Imperium. But the words feel hollow now, tainted by knowledge he should not possess. How does one pray to the Emperor for guidance when investigating actions the Emperor himself ordered kept secret? The morning routine provides structure without comfort. As Matthias prepares for another day in the archives, he makes a decision that will prove either wise or fatal. He needs to speak with someone who possesses deeper knowledge of the Great Crusade era, someone whose scholarly credentials grant access to materials beyond even his considerable clearance. Brother Librarian Ferrus serves the Ultramarines chapter's extensive archives maintained in the Imperial Palace complex. The Ultramarines, inheritors of Robert Gilliman's legacy, maintain perhaps the most comprehensive historical records of any chapter. Their tradition of documentation dating back to the Legion's earliest days. Ferrus himself earned reputation as scholar as much as warrior, a space marine whose centuries of service included extensive time devoted to historical research. Making contact proves straightforward enough. The Remembrancer Order maintains professional relationships with multiple Space Marine chapters, facilitating historical research and documentation. Matthias submits a formal request for consultation regarding Great Crusade era documentation, citing his current archival project. The request contains nothing unusual. Remembrancers frequently consult with chapter historians when working through materials related to Space Marine operations. The response arrives within hours. Brother Librarian Ferrus will meet with him that afternoon in the Ultramarines Palace archives. The speed of the response might be simple efficiency, or it might indicate that Ferrus recognized something in Matthias's request that warranted immediate attention. Either way, the meeting is arranged. The Ultramarines maintain their palace archives in a tower that predates the Horus Heresy, one of the few structures to survive that catastrophe, largely intact. Matthias passes through multiple security checkpoints, each manned by a chapter serfs, who verify his credentials with practiced efficiency. The halls carry that unique atmosphere of Space Marine facilities, everything built to a scale that makes normal humans feel small, decorated with battle honors and relics from campaigns spanning 10,000 years. Brother Librarian Ferrus awaits him in a chamber lined with ancient texts, the Space Marine occupying a reinforced chair designed to support his enhanced bulk. The librarian's power armor bears the blue and gold of the Ultramarines, decorated with scholarly markings that denote his position within the chapter's extensive hierarchy. His face, showing perhaps 3 centuries of service, regards Matthias with calm intelligence. Remembrancer Corvane, the librarian's voice rumbles with the particular resonance of a space marine, augmented biology producing tones that carry weight beyond simple volume. Your request mentioned questions regarding Legion disposition during the early Crusade period. Please be specific about your inquiry. Matthias chooses his words carefully. He is prepared for this meeting, considered how much to reveal and how much to withhold. I have been working through campaign records from the first few decades of the Great Crusade. My documentation has revealed inconsistencies in fleet manifests and command rosters, gaps in the Legion numbering sequence. Ferrus's expression does not change, but something shifts in his bearing. A subtle tension, perhaps, or heightened attention. Gaps, the librarian repeats, the word carrying no inflection. You refer, I presume, to the Second and 11th. The directness catches Matthias off guard. He had expected denials, deflection, perhaps claims of ignorance. Instead, Ferrus acknowledges the subject with matter-of-fact confirmation. Yes, Matthias manages. I have found extensive evidence of systematic redaction across multiple document types and time periods. The pattern suggests deliberate historical revision rather than simple archival loss. The librarian rises, his movements carrying the fluid precision of enhanced physiology and centuries of combat experience. He approaches a specific section of shelving, withdrawing an ancient tome bound in material Matthias cannot identify. What I am about to tell you, Ferrus says, returning to his seat, is known to very few outside the Adeptus Astartes. It is not classified in the conventional sense. No formal restriction prevents me from speaking of it, but neither is it discussed. A distinction you must understand. Matthias nods, leaning forward despite himself. The Second and 11th Legions existed, Ferrus continues, opening the tome to reveal pages of handwritten text in Gothic script. They fought in the Great Crusade for several decades. Their Primarchs were found, as were all our genetic fathers. They led their legions in conquest and compliance. And then, he pauses, choosing his next words with visible care. They were removed, Matthias echoes. What does that mean? It means the librarian's eyes fix on him with uncomfortable intensity, that approximately 60 standard years into the Great Crusade, the Second and 11th Legions ceased to exist. Their Primarchs disappeared from Imperial records. Their warriors were either redistributed to other legions, or, he does not finish the sentence, or what? Or they fell, Ferrus says simply. In battle, through treachery, by the Emperor's own hand. The details were lost even to us. What remains is only the fact of their absence, and the explicit directive from the Emperor that their memory should not be preserved. Matthias's mind races. But why? Space Marines have fallen before. Legions have been nearly destroyed. Why erase these two specifically? The librarian closes the tome gently. That is the question, is it not? The one that every scholar who discovers this gap asks eventually. And the answer, he pauses again. The answer, Remembrancer Corvane, is dangerous to pursue. I speak now not as a fellow historian, but as someone who has witnessed the price of certain knowledge. You're warning me to stop my investigation. I'm advising you to consider whether the truth you seek is worth the consequences of seeking it. The Emperor himself ordered this deletion. The Primarchs who survived the heresy, my own Gene Father included, honored that order. They do not speak of their lost brothers, even among themselves, even in the most private moments. They maintain silence. This revelation strikes Matthias harder than anything before. The living Primarchs, Guilliman, who has returned to lead the Imperium. They know what happened, and they choose to maintain the same silence imposed 10,000 years ago. What could they have done that was so terrible? Matthias hears himself ask, the question escaping before wisdom can stop it. Verus regards him for a long moment, his enhanced biology making it impossible to read subtle cues in his expression. When he speaks, his voice carries weight that makes Matthias's spine straighten involuntarily. Consider what the Emperor forgave during the heresy. Consider that Magnus, whose sorcery broke the Emperor's own webway project and doomed humanity to 10,000 years of suffering, earned only the burning of his homeworld. Consider that Lorgar, whose worship directly led to the heresy's beginning, was simply censured and allowed to continue serving until he turned traitor. Consider all the failures, the mistakes, the compromises the Emperor tolerated from his sons. He leans forward, the movement carrying predatory grace that reminds Matthias that this scholar is also a warrior who has fought for centuries. Now consider what could have been so severe, so fundamentally unforgivable, that the Emperor chose not to punish it, not to document it, not even to remember it, but to simply erase it from existence, as if those two sons had never been born, as if their legions had never fought, as if the very concept of them was too dangerous to preserve. The silence that follows holds weight. Matthias finds himself unable to look away from the librarian's gaze, pinned by the intensity of that stare. Some mysteries, Verus continues quietly, exist not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth itself is hazardous. Knowledge can corrupt, Remembrancer, not metaphorically, not as metaphor for moral failing, but literally. There are things one can learn that change the mind in ways that cannot be reversed. That is why the Emperor, who valued truth above nearly all things, chose to bury this particular truth so deeply. Matthias forces himself to speak past the dryness in his throat. Are you saying the Second and 11th Primarchs, what? Turned to chaos, found something in the warp that corrupted them beyond redemption? I am saying, the librarian emphasizes each word, that I do not know, nor does any space marine of my acquaintance. The knowledge was deemed too dangerous even for those of us created to be the Emperor's finest warriors. If we, who were made to face the galaxy's worst horrors, are not permitted to know, what does that tell you about the nature of the truth? The logic strikes like a physical blow. Matthias has spent his career documenting horrors, Xenos genocides, chaos incursions, demonic manifestations, the systematic extinction of entire subspecies of humanity deemed too mutated to survive. The Imperium does not shy from recording such things, maintaining detailed accounts for strategic and historical purposes. What could possibly exceed all of that in severity? I have told you this, Terra says, rising to indicate the meeting's conclusion, because I respect your dedication to historical truth, because I understand the compulsion to know, to document, to preserve. But I tell you now, as someone who has walked this galaxy for 300 years, as someone who has seen things that would break unaugmented minds, Some paths lead only to darkness. Some questions should not be asked. Matthias stands as well, though his legs feel uncertain. And if I choose to continue investigating anyway? The librarian's expression becomes, if possible, even more serious. Then you will face consequences I cannot prevent. Powers greater than myself take interest in those who pursue forbidden knowledge. The Inquisition maintains specialists in such matters. They watch for patterns that suggest certain inquiries. Your activities in the archives have likely already drawn attention. Dread settles cold in Matthias's stomach. The Inquisition knows I've been researching the Lost Legions. The Inquisition knows when anyone accesses materials related to the Lost Legions, Ferrus corrects. Whether they care about your specific inquiries depends on how much further you push. As of this moment, you have committed no explicit transgression. You have simply noticed gaps in historical records which any competent scholar would eventually discover. But if you continue, if you pursue this beyond academic curiosity into active investigation, he does not need to finish the sentence. The meeting ends with formalities that feel hollow after such warnings. Matthias exits the Ultramarines archive tower in late afternoon light, Terra's filtered sun painting the palace complex in shades of amber and gold. Around him, the business of the Imperium continues. Administrators hurrying between departments, servitors performing maintenance routines, military personnel moving with purpose toward duties that define their existence. He should heed the warning. Brother Librarian Ferrus offered more courtesy than Matthias had any right to expect, providing information and perspective while making the dangers absolutely clear. A wise man would return to his quarters, delete the unauthorized copies he made from restricted archives, and resume his official documentation duties without further investigation into matters that the Emperor himself deemed too dangerous to preserve. But wisdom has never been Matthias's greatest strength. Curiosity, that quality that led him to become a remembrancer in the first place, pulls stronger than caution. The Emperor's own sons, the Primarchs who led humanity's greatest military expansion, were willing to maintain this silence for 10,000 years. They knew what happened to their lost brothers, and they chose never to speak of it. What could inspire such universal, enduring silence? The question follows Matthias through Terra's crowded streets as he returns to his quarters. It haunts him through his evening routine, through prayer at his shrine, through the hours of darkness when sleep should come, but does not. The librarian's warning echoes in his thoughts. Some knowledge corrupts literally, not metaphorically. Some paths lead only to darkness. But Matthias has already seen the Emperor's handwritten order. He has already accessed restricted archives without authorization. The Inquisition, if Ferrus spoke truly, already knows of his interest in this subject. Stopping now might demonstrate wisdom, but it would also leave him with questions that will gnaw at him for whatever time remains of his life. And perhaps, most compellingly, if the truth is so dangerous that even acknowledging it threatens corruption, doesn't that make it more important to understand? How can humanity defend against threats it refuses to name? How can the Imperium protect itself from dangers it pretends never existed? By dawn, Matthias has made his decision. He will continue his investigation, but more carefully now. He will document what he finds, creating a record that might survive even if he does not. And he will pursue this mystery to whatever end awaits, driven by the understanding that some questions, once asked, demand answers regardless of the consequences. The Second and 11th Legions existed. They fought in the Great Crusade. Their Primarchs led them to victories that should have been remembered, and then they were erased so completely that even Space Marines, warriors created to face horrors that would break lesser beings, are not permitted to know why. Matthias Corvane, Remembrancer of the Imperial Archives, has dedicated his life to preserving truth. He will not stop now, regardless of what powers might take interest in his inquiries, even if that truth leads into darkness from which there is no return. The days following his meeting with Brother Librarian Ferris carry a new quality of tension. Matthias returns to his archival duties, maintaining the appearance of normal work patterns while his mind churns through the implications of what he has learned. The gaps in the records take on different meaning now. Not simple historical oversights, but deliberate excisions made at the highest level of authority. He begins to notice things he might have previously dismissed as coincidence. The same servitor appears near his workstation with unusual frequency, its augmetic eyes tracking his movements with mechanical precision. The access logs for his credential authorization show attempted queries from administrative accounts he does not recognize. Small details, individually meaningless, that collectively suggest increased surveillance. Perhaps Fira spoke truth about the Inquisition, monitoring anyone who showed interest in the Lost Legions. Perhaps Matthias's unauthorized access to restricted materials had triggered automatic security alerts. Or perhaps he has become paranoid, seeing patterns in random noise, letting fear of consequences transform normal archive operations into evidence of conspiracy. But paranoia serves a purpose in the Imperium. Those who survive pay attention to subtle warnings, to shifts in patterns that suggest danger approaches. Matthias does not dismiss these observations, but neither does he allow them to stop his investigation. He adjusts his methodology, becoming more circumspect in his research. Rather than directly accessing materials related to the Second and 11th Legions, he requests documents from adjacent contexts, records from expeditionary fleets that operated in the same sectors, personnel files from officers who would have served alongside the missing legions, technical specifications for equipment and vehicles that all legions utilized. The indirect approach yields surprising results. A logistics manifest for ammunition distribution to various legion forces includes quantities for Second Legion requisitions. A ship registry from a Forge world shows vessels constructed specifically for 11th Legion transportation needs. Supply chain documentation preserves traces that more visible records had erased. Even more revealing are personal effects collections from officers and administrators who served during the relevant period. A naval captain's personal logs mention coordinates to rendezvous with Second Legion forces. An Imperial Army commander's correspondence references tactical coordination with 11th Legion elements. These scattered fragments, individually unremarkable, begin forming a picture. The two Lost Legions had operated across multiple sectors of the Crusade. They participated in major compliance actions, performed garrison duties, conducted the same range of operations as their brother legions. Nothing in these peripheral references suggests any fundamental difference in their behavior or effectiveness. They were simply Space Marine legions, doing what Space Marine legions do, which makes their erasure more mystifying. If they had turned to chaos like the traitor legions during the heresy, why not document that betrayal as warning and inspiration? If they had fallen in battle through some catastrophic mistake, why not preserve their sacrifice as lesson for future generations? The systematic removal of their memory suggests something different. Not punishment for failure, but prophylactic excision of dangerous knowledge. Matthias establishes a careful routine. His mornings involve documented work on assigned materials, fulfilling his official duties with the same thoroughness that has characterized his career. His afternoons include what would appear to any observer as random research tangents, the sort of intellectual curiosity that historians are expected to display. Only in the evenings, working from his quarters on his personal data slate, does he compile the fragments into coherent analysis. The private database grows slowly but steadily. Supply manifests, ship registries, personnel rosters with redacted sections, fleet dispositions showing gap number Legion elements, orders of battle that reference unnamed units in positions where only Space Marines would operate. Each individual piece proves nothing, but collectively they demonstrate that extensive records once existed, records that had been methodically removed. 3 weeks into this careful investigation, the first direct warning arrives. Matthias finds it when he returns to his quarters after a long day in the archives. A data slate rests on his desk, one he does not recognize and certainly did not leave there. The device bears no markings, no indication of ownership or origin. When he activates it, a single message appears in High Gothic. Your curiosity is noted. It would be unfortunate if that curiosity led to consequences. Consider what you value and whether satisfying intellectual appetite is worth losing it. No signature, no sender identification, just the message and the clear implication that someone had accessed his private quarters to leave it. The violation feels worse than any explicit threat. The demonstration that his supposed security means nothing, that he is being watched, that forces he cannot see or resist have decided to make their surveillance known. He should be terrified. Perhaps he is. But alongside the fear comes something else. Confirmation. If his investigation warranted this level of attention, if powers existed that concerned themselves with his inquiries, then he must be approaching something genuinely significant. The threat validates his suspicions. Matthias examines the data slate carefully, looking for any indication of its origin. The device appears to be standard Imperial issue, the sort used by administrative personnel across countless departments. But its data core has been wiped, leaving only the message and no identifying information. Professional work, the sort that suggests institutional resources rather than individual action. He considers his options. He could stop his investigation, destroy his private research, return to official duties and hope that ceasing his inquiries will satisfy whoever left this warning. The sensible choice, the one that would likely ensure his continued survival and career. But stopping now would mean never knowing, would mean a lifetime of questions without answers, of suspecting that he'd approached truth only to turn away at the final moment. And perhaps, most importantly, it would mean letting fear dictate his actions, allowing intimidation to succeed where his own better judgment might have prevailed. Matthias makes a decision that might be brave or might be foolish. He will continue, but he will also take precautions. He begins creating backup copies of his research, storing them in multiple locations. He drafts a comprehensive document summarizing his findings and suspicions, sealing it with instructions to be delivered to trusted colleagues should anything happen to him. The preparations feel melodramatic as he makes them, like a character in some adventure tale who anticipates danger around every corner. But the data slate on his desk serves as solid reminder that the danger is real, that forces exist which concern themselves with his activities. His return to the archives the next morning carries heightened awareness. He notices the same servitors recurring near his workstations. He catches unfamiliar faces among the sparse human staff, individuals whose body language suggests military training beneath civilian clothing. The surveillance, previously subtle, has become more obvious, perhaps deliberately so, intended to reinforce the message left in his quarters. For several days, Matthias maintains his routine without variation. He works on assigned documentation, takes his meals at customary times, returns to his quarters at appropriate hours. To any observer, he appears to have heeded the warning, reducing his research into tangential topics while focusing on official duties. But in reality, he continues working through different channels. The backup copies of his research, stored in locations unknown to any surveillance, continue growing. He begins corresponding with other remembrancers across Terra. Casual professional exchanges that include subtle inquiries about their own archival work. Has anyone else noticed these gaps? Do similar patterns appear in archives maintained by other institutions? The responses prove illuminating. Several colleagues acknowledge similar observations, usually framed as minor curiosities they never pursued deeply. One remembrancer, based in the archives of the Adeptus Ministorum, mentions extensive redaction in prayer records from the early Crusade period. Prayers that apparently once referenced 19 Primarchs found to that date. The current versions reference only 17, the text flowing seamlessly around the missing entries. Another colleague, working through military records in the Departamento Munitorum archives, notes similar gaps in ammunition expenditure reports and casualty projections. The patterns suggest systematic removal across multiple archive systems, each maintaining their own records, but all showing consistent deletion in the same areas. The coordination required for such thoroughness staggers him, not just removing documents from Terra's central archives, but ensuring that every subsidiary archive, every departmental record, every personal account underwent similar revision. The resources and authority necessary for such an operation could only come from the very highest levels of Imperial power, which returns him to the central question: why? 4 weeks after receiving the initial warning, a second message appears. This time, it arrives as a text transmission to his personal Vox unit, sent from an untraceable source. The message is shorter, more direct. Final warning: cease inquiries immediately. Further pursuit will result in administrative action. This is your last courtesy. Administrative action. The euphemism carries weight in the Imperium, where bureaucratic language often masks harsher realities. Administrative action could mean reassignment to some remote location. It could mean investigation by the Inquisition. It could mean simply disappearing, added to the uncounted billions who vanish each year into the machinery of Imperial justice. Matthias deletes the message, but its content burns in his memory. Final warning. Last courtesy. The escalation is clear. Next steps will not involve warnings. Whoever watches his activities has decided the continued investigation warrants more severe response than simple intimidation. He should stop. Every rational calculation suggests stopping. He has pursued this mystery as far as reasonable curiosity can justify, discovered enough to satisfy historical interest, documented sufficient evidence that the gaps in records represent deliberate deletion rather than archival oversight. Going further risks consequences that extend beyond his own safety to potential harm for colleagues, disruption of his work, possibly worse fates than simple career termination. But he has also come too far to turn back. The scattered fragments of information have begun forming patterns, suggestions of something vast and terrible that the Imperium deemed necessary to hide. The warnings themselves serve as confirmation. If his investigation approached nothing of significance, why expend resources intimidating him? Why not simply let him exhaust himself chasing historical ghosts? The truth, whatever it is, lies somewhere deeper in the records, and the escalating warnings suggest he has begun approaching it, getting close enough to warrant increasingly desperate attempts to turn him aside. Matthias spends a long night in prayer before his quarter's shrine, seeking guidance that does not come. The Emperor, whose order began this massive historical revision, offers no counsel to a mortal historian questioning that decision. The cold ceramite of the shrine provides no comfort, no reassurance that the path he has chosen leads anywhere but destruction. By dawn, his resolve has hardened. He will continue his investigation, but with full awareness of the risks. He will document everything, ensure that his research survives, even if he does not, and he will pursue the truth about the Second and 11th Legions to whatever end awaits, driven by the certainty that some knowledge, however dangerous, deserves preservation, even if that preservation costs him everything. The surveillance intensifies over the following days. Matthias no longer bothers noting the watching faces, the recurring servitors, the unauthorized access attempts to his credential logs. The monitoring has become constant and obvious, no longer disguised behind plausible deniability. Someone wants him to know he's being watched, wants the pressure of constant observation to drive him away from his investigation. But Matthias Corvane has spent 20 years as a remembrancer, dedicated to preserving truth in an empire built on necessary lies. He will not abandon that dedication now, regardless of what forces align against him. The Second and 11th Legions existed. Their Primarchs led them in the Emperor's name. And something happened that was so terrible, so fundamentally unacceptable, that every trace of their existence had to be systematically erased. Matthias intends to discover what that was, even if the knowledge destroys him. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source, a casual conversation with an elderly servitor tender who maintains the archive's mechanical workforce. Matthias had noticed the ancient man before, his augmetics dating from at least 3 centuries past, his biological components preserved through extensive rejuvenate treatments that had long since reached their limits. The tender moves through the archives with the familiarity of someone who has spent their entire life in these chambers. Matthias approaches him during a meal break, engaging in the sort of idle conversation that passes time without demanding attention. The old man welcomes the company, clearly starved for human interaction after decades working alongside servitors who lack capacity for genuine dialogue. They speak of trivial matters, the quirks of different servitor models, the challenges of maintaining ancient systems, the peculiar atmosphere of archives where time itself seems suspended. Then, almost casually, The tender mentions a chamber that no longer appears on current archive schematics, a sealed section in sub-level 23, closed off perhaps a century ago after structural concerns about its stability. The tender remembers it from his youth, recalls servitors being withdrawn from that section, and the access points being sealed. Nothing important down there anyway, the old man says, his rheumy eyes distant with memory. Just old material from the Crusade era, duplicate records mostly, things they didn't need to keep accessible. But his offhand comment about duplicate records catches Matthias's attention. The systematic deletion of materials related to the lost legions would have required accessing every archive and every record. But perhaps, in some sealed chamber no longer appearing on schematics, documents might have survived simply because they were forgotten. The deleters, thorough as they were, could not remove what they did not know existed. Obtaining access proves surprisingly straightforward. The sealed section appears on schematics from 60 years past, marked as structurally condemned and scheduled for eventual demolition. But demolition, in the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, can take centuries. The chamber likely remains exactly as it was when sealed, gathering dust while servitors work in adjacent sections. The physical barrier proves less challenging than anticipated. Centuries of neglect have corroded the seal mechanisms, and Matthias's limited technical knowledge proves sufficient to bypass locks that age has already half defeated. The access hatch groans open reluctantly, releasing air that has been trapped for decades, musty, with the particular smell of paper slowly decomposing despite preservation efforts. Beyond lies darkness. Matthias's hand torch cuts through the gloom, revealing rows of storage units stretching into shadows. Unlike the main archive chambers with their climate control and automated preservation systems, this space has been abandoned to slow decay. Moisture has damaged some materials, dust coats everything, and several storage units have collapsed completely, spilling their contents across the floor. He moves carefully, aware that his presence here constitutes yet another violation of protocol. The sealed chamber has been condemned for structural reasons, meaning its continued stability cannot be assured. But the risk feels manageable compared to what he has already done, and the possibility of finding intact records makes the danger worthwhile. The storage units nearest the entrance contain military records from various campaigns, nothing immediately relevant to his investigation. Supply manifests, casualty reports, after-action summaries. The sort of documentation produced by every military operation across 10,000 years. Matthias begins to fear this will prove another dead end, a forgotten chamber containing only duplicate copies of materials preserved elsewhere. Then, deeper into the chamber, he finds what he sought, a storage unit marked with clearance codes that match the restricted materials he accessed weeks earlier. The unit has survived reasonably intact, its contents protected by preservation cases that have resisted moisture better than exposed materials. Inside, Matthias discovers documents that should not exist, complete records from the Second and 11th Legions, spanning decades of the Great Crusade. His hands tremble as he withdraws the first case, breaking seals that have remained intact for centuries. Inside, neatly preserved parchments detail Second Legion operations across multiple sectors. Command rosters list officers whose names appear nowhere in current Imperial records. Campaign reports describe battles that official histories attribute to other forces or simply omit entirely. Personnel files document thousands of Space Marines who fought and died in the Emperor's name, whose sacrifice should have earned remembrance but instead was condemned to deliberate oblivion. The documentation proves extensive, far more comprehensive than the scattered fragments he has pieced together over weeks of careful research. Here, preserved by accident of a sealed chamber and bureaucratic oversight, lies evidence of the Lost Legion's entire existence, their founding, their recruitment patterns, their combat doctrine, their command structure, everything that would allow a historian to understand these legions as completely as any other. Matthias works feverishly, scanning documents with a portable device, racing against time and the knowledge that his presence in this chamber will eventually be discovered. The servitor tender who mentioned this section might speak of their conversation. The surveillance tracking Matthias's movements will note his deviation from normal patterns. He likely has hours at most before someone comes to investigate, but the documents reveal patterns that make hours feel insufficient. Both legions show distinctive characteristics in their operations. The Second Legion appears to have specialized in Xenos threat assessment. Their command structure, including unusual numbers of librarians and scholarly personnel. Campaign reports detail encounters with species that no longer exist in Imperial records, Xenos civilizations that the Legion studied extensively before bringing them into compliance. The 11th Legion's documentation suggests different specialization, advanced void warfare, and long-range reconnaissance. Their fleet compositions differ from standard Legion deployments, with emphasis on fast strike vessels and independent operation capability. Several reports detail extended deployments far beyond Imperial support lines, months or years spent in the void between stars tracking threats before they could threaten compliant worlds. None of this explains why they were erased. Both legions show competence equal to their brothers, success rates comparable to other Crusade forces. The campaign reports contain no indication of disloyalty, heresy, or fundamental failure. They were simply Space Marine legions doing the work that Space Marine legions were created to perform. Then Matthias finds the final document, a series of reports from both legions, filed approximately 60 years into the Great Crusade, detailed discoveries that begin to explain everything. The Second Legion, during compliance action against a Xenos civilization in the galactic northwest, encountered ruins that predated the Eldar Empire, ancient structures of a species the reports refer to only as the Old Ones, containing technology and knowledge that should not have existed. The Legion's librarians studied these ruins extensively, attempting to understand the implications. Their reports grow increasingly concerned, detailing discoveries about the fundamental nature of the warp, about the relationship between real space and the immaterium, about truths regarding chaos that the Imperium's ideology explicitly denies. The final report from the Second Legion's command staff, dated approximately 2 months before their documented operations cease, recommends full disclosure to the Emperor regarding their findings. They detail evidence suggesting that the Emperor's own nature involves connections to the warp that contradict his claims of secular rationality. They document proof that the Immaterium's denizens, what would later be known as the Chaos Gods, existed long before humanity's Age of Strife, that they were not simply manifestations of human emotion, but independent entities that preceded and transcended human civilization. Matthias reads with growing horror. The Second Legion had discovered truths about the nature of reality that undermined the Emperor's entire philosophy. The Imperial truth that ideology claiming the warp held no genuine dangers and that superstition represented mankind's enemy. The Second Legion had proven it false, more than false, deliberately misleading, a necessary lie told to protect humanity from knowledge that might destroy it. The 11th Legion's final reports prove equally damning. During extended void reconnaissance beyond the galaxy's edge, they encountered something in the deep dark between galaxies. The reports describe it incompletely, as if the observers struggled to articulate what they witnessed. References to void predators, to entities that feed on light, to things that should not be perceived. Whatever they found, it broke their understanding of Imperial ideology. The final transmission from the 11th Legion's flagship suggests complete mental breakdown among significant portions of the Force. Marines who had faced every horror of the galaxy without hesitation, whose conditioning made them proof against fear and doubt, they encountered something beyond their capacity to process, something that shattered their certainty in the Emperor's grand design. The implications settle like lead in Matthias's stomach. The Emperor had created his Primarchs and Legions as weapons against every threat the galaxy could produce. But two of those legions, through their specialized functions, discovered truths that the Emperor needed kept hidden. Not heresy in the conventional sense, not betrayal or weakness, but simple exposure to knowledge that undermined everything the Imperium was built upon. And the Emperor's response had been systematic erasure, not punishment, but prophylactic excision. The legions themselves, and perhaps their Primarchs, were removed. The documents provide no details about their ultimate fate, but every trace of what they discovered was buried, every record destroyed, every memory suppressed, as if the very knowledge they possessed was too dangerous for humanity to acknowledge. Matthias understands now why even Space Marines are not permitted to know. It is not about military secrets or tactical concerns. It is about foundational truth, about the lies upon which the Imperium is constructed. The Emperor presented himself as humanity's rational savior, the Great Crusade as a secular enterprise to reclaim mankind's birthright. But the Second Legion discovered proof that the Emperor himself was deeply connected to the warp, that his power derived from the same forces he claimed did not genuinely exist. The 11th Legion encountered evidence that reality itself contained threats beyond Imperial ideology's capacity to explain, things that existed outside the categories of Xenos, chaos, or human mutation, entities or phenomena that simply should not be, but were, and whose existence could not be reconciled with the certainties that kept humanity fighting across a hostile galaxy. Knowledge that, if widely known, might shatter the faith holding the Imperium together. Not faith in the God Emperor, which came later, but faith in the possibility of human victory, in the promise that the galaxy could be made safe through sufficient force and determination. The Second and 11th Primarchs had learned that the galaxy could never truly be safe, that the Emperor's promise was, at its core, a noble lie, and rather than allow that knowledge to spread, to risk it undermining everything he had built, the Emperor chose to erase his own sons from history. Matthias sits in the darkness of the sealed chamber, surrounded by documents that have demolished his understanding of Imperial history. He had expected to find evidence of betrayal, of weakness, of some failure that warranted the Legion's erasure. Instead, he has discovered that their only crime was learning the truth, a truth so fundamental and so corrosive that the Emperor himself deemed their memory too dangerous to preserve. The surveillance Matthias has endured, the warnings he received, suddenly make perfect sense. He has pursued a mystery whose answer threatens the foundations of Imperial belief, and forces exist even 10,000 years after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne that still work to suppress this knowledge. He needs to leave this chamber. He needs to ensure these documents, or at least his scans of them, survive to tell this story. But as he prepares to depart, Matthias hears sounds from the chamber entrance. Footsteps, multiple individuals moving with military precision. The surveillance has finally produced action. Someone has come for him, and this time, it will not be a warning. Matthias gathers what materials he can, stuffing data slates into his robes, knowing that escape is unlikely but determined to preserve what he has discovered. The knowledge must survive, even if he does not. Humanity deserves to know the truth about the lost legions, about what they discovered, about why even their memory was deemed too dangerous to preserve. As armored figures enter the chamber, weapons drawn, Matthias Corvane stands among the scattered records of 2 forgotten legions. He has pursued truth to its conclusion, discovered the answer to questions that should never have been asked, and now he will face the consequences of that discovery. But the truth will survive. He has ensured that. Hidden copies, distributed across Terra's vast archive system, will eventually be found by others as curious as himself. The knowledge cannot be suppressed forever. The Second and 11th legions will be remembered, even if that remembrance comes at terrible cost. The lead figure steps forward, removing their helmet to reveal the stern features of an Inquisitor. Remembrancer Corvane, you have pursued knowledge beyond your authority. Come with us willingly, and this will go easier for you. Matthias straightens, meeting the Inquisitor's gaze with what remains of his courage. I am a remembrancer. My oath is to truth, not comfort. Whatever you do to me, know that others will follow. The truth cannot be buried forever. The Inquisitor's expression suggests she has heard such defiance before, and it has never mattered. Truth, she says quietly, is what we define it to be. Come now. It is time for you to learn why some knowledge must remain buried. And in that moment, as armored guards move to seize him, Matthias understands the final lesson of his investigation. He has not discovered hidden history. He has become part of it, another voice to be silenced, another inquirer to be removed, continuing the pattern established 10,000 years ago, when the Emperor first decided that some truths were too dangerous for humanity to know. The cycle continues, the silence endures, and the lost legions remain lost, their memory preserved only in the gaps where their existence should appear, in the questions that thoughtful historians eventually ask, and in the consequences faced by those who pursue answers too far. The room Matthias awakens in carries no identifying features. Bare walls of dark metal, a single overhead illuminator providing harsh white illumination, a restrained chair that holds him with gentle but unyielding force. No windows, no visible doors in the seamless walls, no indication of location or time passage. The chamber could exist anywhere on Terra, or perhaps somewhere else entirely. The architecture suggests inquisitorial design, functional, deliberately disorienting, built to emphasize the helplessness of whoever occupies it. His last clear memory involves the sealed archive chamber. The Inquisitor's declaration that it was time for him to learn why some knowledge must remain buried. After that, fragments. Being escorted through passages he did not recognize, a brief sensation of movement suggesting transport, chemical sedation that made consciousness slip away like water through grasping fingers. How much time has passed? Hours? Days? The timeless quality of the chamber makes estimation impossible. His chronometer has been removed along with his robes, replaced by a simple grey shift that marks him as prisoner rather than remembrancer. The data slates he had gathered, the evidence he collected, all gone, confiscated by captors who understood exactly what he possessed. But his memory remains. The documents from the sealed chamber, the revelations about what the Second and 11th legions discovered, those cannot be taken from him. Not yet, at least. He suspects his interrogators will try. The wall opens without warning, sections sliding aside to reveal an entrance where none had been visible. The Inquisitor who arrested him enters, followed by two attendants in the anonymous grey robes that mark inquisitorial staff. She carries herself with the particular confidence of someone who has conducted countless interrogations, who knows that cooperation is inevitable and resistance merely delays the process. Remembrancer Corvane, she begins, her voice carrying neither hostility nor warmth. I am Inquisitor Vera Kestrel of the Ordo Hereticus. You have pursued forbidden knowledge regarding the Lost Legions. This investigation has determined you are not acting out of heretical intent, but rather misguided scholarly curiosity. Your cooperation now will determine whether you leave this place with your sanity intact. Matthias's throat feels raw, whether from sedation or thirst, he cannot determine. I discovered evidence, documents that prove the Second and 11th legions were erased not for betrayal, but for learning truth the Emperor deemed too dangerous. That is not heresy, that is history. Kestrel's expression suggests she has heard similar arguments before. History and heresy often occupy the same territory. The distinction lies not in the facts themselves, but in their dissemination and consequences. You accessed restricted materials without authorization. You copied classified documents. You ignored multiple warnings to cease your investigation. These actions constitute serious violations of Imperial law. The Emperor's own order commanded their erasure. Matthias continues, aware that defiance serves no practical purpose, but unable to remain silent. His sons, the Primarchs he created, were removed from history because they discovered truths that contradicted his ideology. The Imperial truth was a lie, and the Lost Legions paid the price for exposing it. The Imperial truth, Kestrel says quietly, settling into a seat that materializes from the floor's surface, was a necessary foundation for the Great Crusade. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself through uncontrolled psychic awakening and warp exposure. The Emperor provided ideology that would protect his species while they conquered the galaxy. That some truths were simplified or concealed does not invalidate the protection that simplification provided. She leans forward slightly, her gaze intense. You believe you have discovered some great conspiracy, some fundamental deception that invalidates the Imperium's entire basis. But consider, what would happen if your discoveries became widely known? If Imperial citizens learned that the Emperor himself was connected to the warp he claimed held no true power? If Space Marines understood that reality contains threats their conditioning cannot prepare them to face? People deserve truth, Matthias responds, the words sounding hollow even as he speaks them. Do they? Kestrel's question carries genuine philosophical weight. Does the average citizen, struggling to survive in a galaxy that wants to consume them, deserve to know that their emperor's promises were noble lies? Does the guardsman, facing down Xenos horrors, deserve to understand that the universe contains things worse than any battlefield can produce? Does anyone benefit from knowledge that shatters faith without providing alternative hope? The logic strikes uncomfortably close to arguments Matthias has made himself in different contexts. The Imperium maintains countless necessary fictions, simplifications that allow billions to function without being crushed by the weight of reality's full horror. His role as Remembrancer has always involved curating truth, presenting it in ways that serve Imperial interests while maintaining factual accuracy. But this feels different. This is not simplification, but erasure, not curation, but suppression. The Second and 11th Legions deserve to be remembered. Their Primarchs should have their places in history, regardless of what they discovered. What happened to them? Matthias asks. The final documents I found detailed their discoveries, but not their ultimate fate. Were they destroyed, scattered to other legions? Did the Emperor execute his own sons? Kestrel studies him for a long moment before responding. That information remains classified at the highest levels. Even I do not possess full details. What I can tell you is that the Second and 11th Primarchs no longer exist in any form that matters. Their legions were redistributed. The warriors themselves, those who could be salvaged, were absorbed into other legions with memory, modification to remove specific recollections. Those who could not be salvaged. She does not complete the sentence. The horror of it settles over Matthias like a physical weight. Not just historical erasure, but literal destruction of anyone who knew the truth. Tens of thousands of space marines, perhaps hundreds of thousands, including support personnel and attached forces, all either mind-wiped or eliminated to preserve the secret of what their legions had discovered. The Primarchs themselves, Kestrel continues, were removed from existence through means that remain above even my clearance to know. What matters is that they are gone, along with the knowledge they possessed. The galaxy is safer for that absence, regardless of how unjust their fate may seem. Safer, Matthias repeats, the word tasting like ash. The Imperium murdered its own warriors, erased its own heroes, all to preserve lies about the nature of reality. How does that make anyone safer? Because, the Inquisitor says with quiet intensity, the alternative is worse. The Second Legion discovered proof that the Emperor's divinity, which modern ecclesiarchy teaches as literal truth, is simultaneously correct and grotesquely incomplete. The Emperor is not simply divine. He is something far stranger and more dangerous. Knowledge of his true nature could shatter the faith that holds the Imperium together. She stands, beginning to pace the small chamber. The 11th Legion encountered entities in the void between galaxies that should not exist within any framework we possess for understanding reality. Things that are not chaos, not Xenos, not any category our ideology allows for. Simply knowing those things exist creates psychic vulnerability to them. They are mimetic hazards, remembrancer, ideas that infect and corrupt through mere awareness of their existence. The explanation makes terrible sense. Matthias has documented enough chaos incursions to understand how knowledge itself can serve as vector for corruption. Certain symbols, when viewed, create warp breaches. Certain names, when spoken, summon demons, Some truths about reality's nature are not merely dangerous to know, but literally toxic to consciousness. If the 11th Legion encountered things worse than chaos, entities that exist outside the Imperium's framework for understanding threats, then knowledge of those entities might represent an existential hazard. Not metaphorically dangerous, but literally poisonous to human minds, creating vulnerability where none previously existed. So the Emperor erased them, Matthias says slowly, not as punishment, but as quarantine, to prevent the spread of knowledge that could not be safely contained. Precisely, Kestrel confirms, it was not cruelty, but necessity. The Primarchs who survived were informed of their brother's fate, required to maintain silence regarding it, and that burden has lasted 10,000 years. Robert Gilliman, recently returned to lead the Imperium, knows what happened to his lost brothers. He maintains the silence still, because he understands why it must be kept. She returns to her seat, regarding him with something approaching sympathy. You pursued truth, Remembrancer Corvane. That is admirable. Your dedication to historical accuracy does you credit, but you have discovered why some truths must remain buried, not for political convenience, not to protect powerful interests, but because the knowledge itself represents a weapon that could be turned against humanity. Matthias wants to argue, to maintain his position that truth always deserves preservation. But the logic defeats him. He has spent his career documenting horrors precisely so humanity could learn from them, could prepare defenses against future threats. But what defense exists against knowledge that corrupts through mere comprehension? How does one prepare for threats that exist outside reality's framework? The Second and 11th Legion's erasure was not injustice but tragic necessity. Their Primarchs had been sacrificed to protect humanity from truths that could destroy it. And 10,000 years later, the Imperium maintained that same silence because the danger had never diminished. What happens to me now? Matthias asks, though he suspects he knows the answer. Kestrel's expression becomes sorrowful. You have learned too much to be allowed to retain full memory. The documents you discovered will be destroyed, this time permanently. Your investigation will be erased from all records, and your memory of these events will be adjusted. You will recall pursuing the lost legions as historical curiosity, finding nothing substantive, and eventually losing interest. The past weeks will feel like a dream upon waking, details fading as dreams do. Memory modification. The same fate that befell those space marines from the lost legions who could be salvaged. Matthias will continue existing, but the knowledge he gained, the understanding he achieved, will be taken from him. He will become another instrument of the very suppression he sought to oppose. Is there no other way? He hears himself ask. Can I not simply remain silent? I could vow never to speak of this, never to pursue it further. Vows break, Kestrel says gently. Promises fail. Memory persists in ways we cannot fully control. You might maintain silence for years, decades even, but eventually, in a moment of weakness or crisis, the knowledge might escape. We cannot risk that. You must understand, this is mercy. True heretics, those who genuinely threaten imperial stability, face far harsher fates. You are simply a scholar who pursued dangerous knowledge. Your punishment will be to forget. She stands, signaling the interview's conclusion. The process is not painful. You will sleep, and when you wake, you will be returned to your duties with a gap in memory that will feel entirely natural. Remembrancers often lose themselves in research for weeks, emerging with little recollection of the details. This will feel no different. As the attendants approach with equipment, Matthias recognizes as memory modification apparatus. A desperate final question escapes him. Did they suffer? The Second and 11th Primarchs. When they were removed, did they suffer? Kestrel pauses at the chamber's opening. I do not know, but I hope not. They were the Emperor's sons, beloved despite the necessity of their erasure. If mercy existed in their ending, I believe he would have granted it. That is the only comfort I can offer you. The door closes behind her, leaving Matthias alone with the attendants and their instruments. He wants to resist, to fight, to preserve the knowledge he has gained. But resistance serves no purpose. He is one man against the institutional power of the Inquisition, against traditions maintained for 10 millennia, against necessities that predate the Imperium itself. As the apparatus is connected and sedation begins to take hold, Matthias's final conscious thought circles back to the beginning. He had pursued truth, discovered it, and learned why it must remain hidden. The Second and 11th Legions existed, fought with honor, and were erased not for failure, but for success, for discovering truths that humanity could not safely possess. Their memory would remain lost, their Primarchs would stay forgotten, and Matthias Corvane, who briefly knew their story, would join the countless others across 10,000 years who had pursued the same mystery to the same inevitable conclusion. The knowledge cannot be suppressed forever, but it can be suppressed for now. And sometimes, in a galaxy of horrors, temporary victories are the only kind available. Darkness takes him gently, and with it goes everything he learned. Matthias Corvane returns to consciousness slowly, awareness filtering back in gradual stages. He lies in his own bed, in his own quarters, within the Remembrancer's halls. Morning light, filtered through Terra's perpetual atmospheric haze, creates a familiar amber glow that marks the start of another day. Nothing appears different. Everything feels perfectly normal, except for the gap. He sits up, head aching with dull pressure that might be remnants of sedation or simply the result of poor sleep. His chronometer indicates 3 weeks have passed since his last clear memory. 3 weeks that feel like they should be there, but somehow are not. The sensation resembles waking from a dream whose details immediately fade, leaving only the vague impression that something occurred. His data slates rest on his desk, organized as he always keeps them, containing documentation of his current archival project. Reading through his recent work notes, everything appears consistent. He has been cataloging Great Crusade era documents, routine work that he has performed countless times throughout his career. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the missing time. But beneath the normalcy, something feels wrong. A sensation of incompleteness, as if he has forgotten something important. He searches his quarters, looking for anything that might explain the gap. Finding nothing out of place, his belongings occupy their customary positions. His shrine shows evidence of regular prayer. The small personal effects that mark this space as his own all remain exactly where they should be. The feeling persists throughout his morning routine. As he prepares for the day, performs his ablutions, recites his prayers, the nagging sense of absence follows him. Something happened during those 3 weeks, something significant that should occupy his memory but does not. He reports to the archives as always, descending into the familiar environment of sub-level 17. The servitors move through their program patterns. The environmental systems maintain their subtle harmony of temperature and humidity. everything proceeds exactly as it should, and that very normalcy feels somehow suspicious. Brother Septon, a fellow remembrancer who maintains the adjacent workstation, greets him with casual friendliness. "Corvane, good to see you back. How was your research sabbatical?" Research sabbatical. The term triggers something, a faint echo that refuses to fully resolve. "I took a sabbatical?" Septon's expression shows mild concern. "You don't remember? You filed for special project time about 3 weeks back. Said you were pursuing some historical tangent that required deep research. I assumed you were buried in some dusty corner of the archives. You know how you get when something catches your interest." The explanation makes sense. Fits perfectly with Matthias's known behavior patterns. He does occasionally lose himself in research projects, emerging days later with comprehensive documentation and little recollection of the time spent in focused work. This should feel entirely normal, but it doesn't. The explanation feels too convenient, too perfectly crafted to paper over the gap without raising questions. His mind keeps circling back to the missing 3 weeks, probing at the absence like tongue exploring the socket where a tooth once sat. He settles into his workstation, calling up his assigned materials for the day. More Great Crusade documentation, campaign reports from expeditionary fleets operating in the galactic northwest, standard cataloging work that requires attention but not extensive analytical thought. The sort of tasks that should allow his mind to wander, to process the nagging sensation that something important has been forgotten. Hours pass in mechanical routine, document review, authentication, cataloging, moving methodically through materials that blur together in their similarity. But as he works, Matthias begins noticing patterns that trigger that same elusive recognition. Gaps in manifests, missing legion designations, formatting anomalies that suggest deletion rather than simple omission. He has seen these patterns before. Recently, during the missing 3 weeks, the thought comes unbidden, and with it a flash of something. A sealed chamber, documents scattered across the floor, an inquisitor's stern face. The image vanishes before he can properly grasp it, leaving only fading afterimage and the certainty that it meant something. Matthias forces himself to continue working, trying to ignore the growing conviction that his memory has been deliberately altered. The Imperium possesses technology capable of modifying recollection, removing specific knowledge while leaving general function intact. Such measures get employed for security purposes or to protect individuals from traumatic memories, or to suppress dangerous knowledge. What did he discover during those missing 3 weeks? What knowledge did he possess that warranted its removal? The questions consume him through the remainder of the workday. He maintains the appearance of normal function, completes his assigned tasks, interacts appropriately with colleagues. But internally, his mind works at the problem, trying to reconstruct what has been taken from him. By evening, he has made a decision. Whatever he discovered during that gap, he can discover again. The documents that triggered his investigation must still exist. The evidence that led him down whatever path he followed remains accessible. If his memory has been modified, then he will simply retrace his steps, rebuild the knowledge that was taken. But he will be more careful this time, more subtle in his inquiries. Whatever consequences his previous investigation triggered, he will work to avoid repeating them. That night, alone in his quarters, Matthias begins searching his belongings for anything that might explain the missing time. He he examines his data slates more carefully, looking for deleted files or hidden notes. He checks his personal effects for anything unusual. He even inspects his clothing for signs of activity inconsistent with routine archival work. And he finds something. Hidden in the lining of his archive robes, a small data chip no larger than his fingernail. The placement feels deliberate, as if he had hidden it there himself, knowing that his other materials might be confiscated. The chip appears to be standard Imperial issue, the sort used for backing up personal data, but its presence in that location suggests importance. Matthias extracts the chip carefully, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation and dread. He inserts it into a portable reader, accessing its contents with authorization codes that his fingers type without conscious thought, as if the numbers exist in muscle memory deeper than whatever mental modification he underwent. The chip contains a single document, a comprehensive report written in his own hand, detailing everything he discovered about the Second and 11th Legions, the Lost Legion's existence, their specializations, their ultimate discoveries that led to their erasure. Everything he learned in the sealed archive chamber, everything the Inquisitor told him, everything that explains why his memory was modified. Reading his own words, Matthias feels the knowledge settling back into place like pieces of a puzzle, reassembling themselves. He remembers now, not perfectly, not with the clarity of direct experience, but enough to understand what happened. He pursued the mystery of the Lost Legions, discovered truth too dangerous to preserve, and faced consequences that should have ended his investigation permanently. But he had prepared for this. His past self, anticipating the possibility of memory modification, had created this backup, had hidden it where casual search might not find it, but where he himself could eventually discover it if he looked, a final act of defiance against the suppression he knew was coming. The document ends with a message to his future self. If you are reading this, then they have taken your memory. They will tell you it was necessary, that the knowledge you possessed was too dangerous to preserve. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps the truth about the Lost Legions genuinely threatens humanity's survival. But you deserve to know what you discovered, to make your own choice about what to do with that knowledge. The decision is yours now. Remember and risk consequences, or delete this file and accept the mercy of ignorance. Choose wisely. Matthias sits in the darkness of his quarters, the data chip feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He has recovered the knowledge that was taken from him. He understands now why the Second and 11th Legions were erased, why their memory cannot be preserved, why even the Primarchs maintain silence about their lost brothers. The question becomes, what does he do with this understanding? He could delete the file, destroy the chip, return to his life without the burden of dangerous knowledge, accept that some truths are too corrosive to possess, that the Imperium's decision to suppress this information serves humanity's best interests. He has been given a second chance at ignorance, an opportunity to live without the weight of secrets that could destroy him. Or he could preserve what he has learned, could create new hidden copies, new backups, ensuring that the truth survives even if he does not, could continue the work that got him captured the first time, driven by the conviction that knowledge, however dangerous, deserves preservation. The choice feels impossible. Every rational calculation suggests destruction, acceptance, moving forward without looking back. But something in Matthias, the same quality that led him to become a Remembrancer, rebels against that logic. Truth matters. History deserves accurate preservation. The lost legions should be remembered, even if that memory comes at terrible cost. He makes a decision that will define the remainder of his life, however long or short that might be. He will preserve this knowledge, but differently than before. No more direct investigation. No more pursuing documents that will draw inquisitorial attention. Instead, he will encode what he has learned into his regular work, subtle hints and suggestions woven throughout the historical documentation he creates. Future scholars, those curious enough to notice patterns, might eventually piece together the truth from fragments he leaves behind. It will take decades, perhaps centuries, but eventually someone will discover what he discovered, will ask the questions he asked, will learn the truth about the Second and 11th Legions. And when they do, they will face the same choice he faces now: to preserve dangerous knowledge or accept necessary ignorance. Matthias creates encrypted copies of the document, distributing them throughout his various data storage locations. He embeds fragments of the story in seemingly unrelated archival work, creating a trail that only the most dedicated historian might eventually follow. And he returns to his duties, maintaining the appearance of normal function while carrying knowledge that could get him killed. The Second and 11th Legions will not be forgotten, not completely, not as long as he lives and works to preserve their memory, their Primarch's sacrifice, their warrior's fate, the truths they discovered that proved too dangerous for humanity to know. All of it will survive in hidden corners of the archives, waiting for future generations to uncover. It is a small victory, perhaps a futile one, but it is the only victory available to a single remembrancer against the institutional power of the Imperium. And sometimes, in a galaxy of horrors, small victories represent the only kind worth achieving. The data chip returns to its hiding place in his robe's lining. The document it contained has been copied, distributed, encoded into his regular work. And Matthias Corvane, who briefly forgot the most important discovery of his career, resumes his life carrying dangerous knowledge and the determination to ensure it survives, even if he does not. Months pass in careful routine. Matthias performs his archival duties with exemplary precision, earning commendations for the thoroughness of his documentation and the quality of his historical analysis. To outside observation, he appears to have returned to normal function after whatever personal crisis occupied his missing 3 weeks. His colleagues welcome his renewed focus. His supervisors note improved productivity. Everything suggests successful reintegration into routine service. But beneath that normalcy, Matthias works to preserve what he has learned. The process proves painstakingly slow, requiring patience and subtlety that test his resolve daily. He cannot simply document the truth about the lost legions. That would draw immediate attention and result in another memory modification, this time perhaps more thorough. Instead, he must encode the knowledge in ways that appear innocent while preserving information for future discovery. His method involves layers of indirection. When cataloging a fleet manifest, he notes unusual gaps in legion numbering without commentary, letting the pattern speak for itself. When documenting campaign timelines, he marks periods where certain expeditionary forces show suspiciously reduced activity, as if large portions of their strength had been withdrawn for unknown purposes. When analyzing command structures, he highlights anomalies in Legion deployment patterns that suggest missing organizational elements. Individually, these observations mean nothing, They appear as the sort of minor historical curiosities that any thorough scholar might notice and document. But collectively, they form a trail. Someone reading Matthias's work comprehensively, someone curious enough to cross-reference his various observations, might eventually notice the pattern, might begin asking the same questions he asked, might pursue the same investigation that led him to the truth. It is slow work, work measured in decades rather than months. But Matthias has no illusion that this knowledge can be widely disseminated in his lifetime. The best he can achieve is ensuring it survives, preserved in the archive's vast collection, where future historians might eventually discover it. The surveillance he noticed during his initial investigation has not entirely disappeared. Matthias remains aware of watching eyes, of servitors that track his movements with more attention than their programming should require, of occasional irregularities in his credential logs that suggest someone monitors his access patterns. The Inquisition has not forgotten him. They simply observe, waiting to see if the memory modification holds, ready to intervene if he shows signs of renewed investigation. So he maintains perfect surface compliance. He requests no restricted materials, pursues no obvious inquiries about the lost legions, gives no indication that he possesses knowledge he should not have. His work focuses on uncontroversial topics. His research follows approved methodologies, and his documentation adheres strictly to established guidelines. But the weight of what he knows grows heavier with each passing day. The knowledge of the Second and 11th Legion's fate, of their Primarchs' terrible discoveries, of the Emperor's decision to erase his own sons from history. It settles on Matthias's shoulders like physical burden. He finds himself unable to view Imperial ideology with the same uncomplicated faith he once possessed. The Emperor, presented throughout the Imperium as humanity's savior and guardian, ordered the murder of his own sons to protect dangerous knowledge. The Great Crusade, that supposedly noble endeavor to unite humanity, was built on fundamental lies about the nature of reality and the Emperor's own connection to the warp. Even the Space Marines, those incorruptible warriors created to be humanity's defenders, could be mind-wiped and redeployed like simple military assets when convenience demanded it. Understanding these truths changes how Matthias views everything he documents. When recording victories of the Great Crusade, he cannot help but wonder how many involved lost Legion forces whose contributions were later excised from records. When cataloguing honors granted to loyal Primarchs, he thinks of the two who are not remembered, whose achievements were deemed less important than the necessity of their erasure. When documenting the founding of Space Marine chapters, he wonders how many secretly carry gene seed from the lost legions, their warriors unknowingly descended from Primarchs whose names they will never know. The burden manifests in his personal life. He finds prayer increasingly difficult, the words feeling hollow when directed toward an emperor whose divinity proves more complicated and troubling than doctrine teaches. He struggles to maintain social connections with colleagues, aware that he can never fully be honest with them about what occupies his thoughts. Even routine conversations about archival work carry an undercurrent of deception, as he carefully avoids topics that might reveal his knowledge. Sleep becomes troubled, plagued by dreams where faceless Primarchs stand in empty chambers, their pedestals numbered 2nd and 11th, while the Emperor watches from shadows with eyes that burn with cold necessity. He wakes from these dreams unsettled, unable to shake the conviction that he has glimpsed something true, some psychic impression of events 10,000 years past. 6 months after recovering his hidden notes, Matthias experiences his first overt contact since his initial capture. He returns to his quarters one evening and to find an envelope resting on his desk, sealed with wax bearing an inquisitorial sigil. Inside, a single sheet of parchment carries a handwritten message in elegant High Gothic. Your discretion is noted and appreciated. Continue as you have been. Remember that mercy extended can be withdrawn if circumstances change. K. The signature initial suggests Inquisitor Kestrel, the woman who interrogated him after his capture. The message makes clear that his activities remain under observation, that his careful encoding of information has not gone unnoticed, but also that his current approach does not warrant intervention. They are allowing him to continue his subtle preservation efforts, either because they deem it harmless or because they see value in maintaining a controlled outlet for knowledge they cannot fully suppress. Matthias burns the parchment as he suspects he is meant to do, but its message lingers. He is being tolerated, not ignored. His work receives tacit permission to continue only as long as it remains sufficiently indirect. The moment he crosses whatever invisible line separates acceptable archival notation from active dissemination of forbidden knowledge, the Inquisition will act again. The realization brings strange comfort. He is not truly alone in bearing this knowledge. The Inquisition, or at least certain members of it, understands what he is trying to preserve. They may disagree with his methods, may see his efforts as foolish or dangerous, but they recognize his motivations. And for now, they are willing to let him continue. Perhaps because they know, as he is beginning to understand, that the knowledge cannot truly be suppressed forever. Too many people across too many centuries have discovered the same truth. The gaps in Imperial history are too obvious to those who look carefully. The Second and 11th Legion's existence cannot be completely erased when their absence leaves such clear negative space in historical records. The best the Imperium can achieve is management of the knowledge, ensuring it spreads slowly enough that it never reaches critical mass, that it never becomes widely enough known to threaten the foundational myths holding humanity together. Matthias's careful documentation, his subtle preservation efforts, represent a controlled bleed rather than catastrophic revelation. He can live with that. It is not the grand exposure of truth he might have imagined in younger, more idealistic days, but it is preservation of a kind, maintenance of historical accuracy, even if that accuracy must remain hidden for now. Future generations might eventually piece together the full story, might understand what happened to the lost legions and why their memory was suppressed. And when that understanding comes, it will be because historians like Matthias maintained the trail of evidence, keeping the truth alive even when it could not be openly acknowledged. The work continues. Years pass in careful documentation, in subtle hints woven throughout legitimate archival projects, in the slow accumulation of evidence that might someday coalesce into understanding. Matthias ages, his hair graying, his movements becoming less spry, but his dedication never wavers. He trains younger remembrancers, passing along not the dangerous knowledge itself, but the methodology for discovering it. He teaches them to notice gaps in historical records, to question convenient narratives, to understand that official histories represent curation as much as documentation. some of his students will pursue these lessons further, will ask questions that lead them down the same path he followed. And when they do, they will find the trail he has left, the breadcrumbs carefully scattered throughout decades of archival work. On Terra's surface, the Imperium continues its endless struggle against darkness. The Great Rift tears reality in half. Primarch Guilliman returns to lead humanity's defense. New threats emerge while ancient enemies press their attacks. The galaxy burns as it has burned for 10,000 years, and the lost legions remain lost, their memory preserved only in shadows and silences. But in the depths of the Imperial archives, in the work of one dedicated remembrancer, truth survives, incomplete, fragmented, accessible only to those willing to search for it, but preserved nonetheless. The Second and 11th Legions existed. Their Primarchs discovered truths too dangerous for humanity to acknowledge, and they were erased not as punishment, but as protection, sacrificed to defend humanity from knowledge that could destroy it. Matthias Corvane will take this knowledge to his grave, but he will not take it alone. He has ensured that others can discover it, that the truth endures even if it must remain hidden. It is a small victory in a galaxy where victories of any kind come rarely and at great cost. But it is enough. It has to be enough. Because in the end, that is all any historian can achieve. To preserve truth as best they can, to maintain records against the ravages of time and the suppressions of power, and to trust that future generations will value what has been preserved enough to seek it out. The lost legions are not forgotten, not completely, not as long as someone remembers to look for what is missing, to ask why certain gaps exist, to pursue knowledge that others prefer buried. And in the 41st millennium, where ignorance is survival and knowledge is heresy, the persistent curiosity might be the most dangerous thing of all. 15 years after his initial capture, Matthias receives a visitor in his private study within the Remembrancer's halls. The young woman who stands before him, nervously clutching a data slate, represents everything he has worked toward. A curious mind encountering patterns in the archives and having the courage to pursue them. Her name is Lisa Kane, recently elevated to full Remembrancer status after completing her apprenticeship under Matthias's tutelage. She possesses the sharp intellect and dedication to detail that marks exceptional historians, combined with exactly the sort of curiosity that makes such dedication dangerous. Matthias has watched her development over the past 3 years, recognizing in her the same qualities that led him to his own investigation. Master Corvane, she begins, her voice careful despite evident excitement. I have been reviewing your documentation of the Great Crusade fleet deployments, and I've noticed irregularities. Matthias maintains neutral expression, though his heart rate increases. Irregularities are common in historical records this ancient. What specifically concerns you? She activates her data slate, displaying analysis she has compiled. The numbering systems for Legion identification show consistent gaps between 1st and 3rd, between 10th and 12th. Initially, I assumed these were filing errors or corrupted data, but the pattern appears too systematic across too many independent sources. She looks up from her slate, meeting his eyes with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to fear the implications of what they discover. Master, were their legions numbered 2nd and 11th? And if so, why do no records acknowledge them? The moment Matthias has anticipated for 15 years has arrived. He is prepared for this conversation, considered how to respond when someone followed the trail he carefully laid. But now that it occurs, he finds himself hesitating, aware of what this question will cost the young woman before him. That, he says carefully, is a dangerous inquiry to pursue. Lisa's expression shows determination rather than deterrence. With respect, Master, isn't all meaningful historical work dangerous? If we only pursue comfortable questions, we serve propaganda rather than truth. Her words echo arguments Matthias made himself decades ago, before he learned the true price of such conviction. He gestures for her to sit, settling into his own chair, with the deliberate movements of age buying time to choose his words. Before I answer your question, he begins, you must understand something about truth in the Imperium. Not all knowledge serves humanity's interests. Some facts, however accurate, create more harm than enlightenment. The scholar's duty includes judgment about what truths deserve preservation and what truths deserve careful handling. You're saying the Second and 11th legions existed, Lisa states rather than asks, her quick mind grasping implications. And something happened to them that the Imperium deemed better forgotten than remembered. Matthias cannot help but smile slightly at her directness. He sees himself in her, the same refusal to accept comfortable ignorance, the same compulsion toward truth regardless of consequences. I am saying that you have noticed something genuine. The gaps you observe in historical records are not filing errors. He pauses, considering how much to reveal. Too much, and he risks drawing inquisitorial attention that could harm them both. Too little, and he fails in his mission to preserve knowledge for future generations. The balance proves difficult to find. If I were to continue investigating this, Lisa asks into his silence, what would I discover? Consequences, Matthias answers honestly. You would discover that some inquiries draw attention from powers that do not welcome curiosity. You would learn that the Imperium maintains certain silences for reasons that extend beyond political convenience, and you would face a choice between comfortable ignorance and dangerous knowledge, between your career and your conscience. You speak, she observes, as someone who has made that choice himself. Matthias regards her for a long moment, weighing his response. Finally, he makes a decision. I speak as someone who pursued the same questions you are beginning to ask, who found answers that were taken from me, who has spent 15 years working to ensure those answers survive, even if they cannot be openly acknowledged. He withdraws the data chip from its hiding place in his robe's lining, the same chip that contained his original notes, now updated with 15 years of additional documentation. What I am about to give you represents the most dangerous thing you will ever possess. Knowledge that has been suppressed for 10,000 years, that the Emperor himself ordered buried, that forces exist to prevent from becoming widely known. Lisa's hand trembles slightly as she accepts the chip, though her voice remains steady. Tell me. And so Matthias does. He tells her everything. The Lost Legion's existence, their specializations, their discoveries that proved too dangerous for humanity to acknowledge. He explains the Emperor's decision to erase his own sons from history, the redistribution or destruction of their warriors, the systematic purging of every record that mentioned them. He details his own investigation, his capture, the memory modification he underwent, and the 15 years he has spent preserving this knowledge in ways that might allow it to survive. As he speaks, Lisa's expression shifts from excitement to horror to grim understanding. She is intelligent enough to grasp the implications immediately, to understand why this knowledge has been suppressed and what possessing it will mean for her. When Matthias finishes, silence fills his study for long minutes. Outside, Terra continues its eternal routine. Billions of souls moving through their daily existence, unaware of the conversation occurring in this small room, unaware that dangerous truth is being passed from one guardian to another. "Why tell me?" Lisa finally asks. "Why not simply let me discover it on my own, or never discover it at all?" "Because," Matthias answers, "I am 73 years old. Rejuvenate treatments have extended my life beyond natural span, but even those have limits. In another decade, perhaps two, if I am fortunate, I will die. And when I do, this knowledge must survive. I have encoded it throughout my archival work, yes, but that passive preservation might not be enough. It needs active guardians, people who understand its importance and work consciously to maintain it." He leans forward, his aged eyes intense. "You are the best student I have taught in 40 years of service. You possess the intelligence to understand this knowledge, the discretion to preserve it carefully, and the dedication to truth that will drive you to maintain it despite the risks. That is why I am telling you, because you are capable of continuing this work after I am gone." Lisa turns the data chip over in her hands, its small size belying the weight of what it contains. "And if I choose not to, if I decide that this knowledge is too dangerous, that the Imperium's decision to suppress it was correct, then you delete that chip," Matthias says simply. "You forget this conversation, return to your normal work, and live without the burden I have carried for decades. I will not judge you for that choice. It might be the wiser path, but you will spend the rest of your career knowing that truth exists, which you chose not to preserve, questions you decided not to pursue. For some people, that burden weighs heavier than any knowledge could." Another long silence. Matthias can almost see Lisa's internal struggle, the same conflict he experienced years ago between wisdom and curiosity, between safety and conscience. He knows which choice she will make, recognized it the moment she entered his study. But she needs to reach that conclusion herself, to own the decision rather than having it imposed upon her. "If I agree to this," Lisa says slowly, "to becoming a guardian of this knowledge, what exactly does that entail?" "Subtlety," Matthias answers. "Patience, the discipline to preserve dangerous truth without actively disseminating it. You will continue your normal work, but you will also encode fragments of this knowledge throughout your documentation, creating trails that future historians might follow. You will train students as I trained you, watching for those with the right combination of intelligence and curiosity. And when you find them, when you identify someone capable of continuing this work, you will pass on what you know, as I am doing now with you." "A conspiracy of historians," Lisa murmurs, "maintaining forbidden knowledge across generations." "Not a conspiracy," Matthias corrects gently. "A preservation effort. The Inquisition knows what we are doing, or at least suspects it. They tolerate it because they understand that complete suppression proves impossible. The best they can achieve is containment, ensuring the knowledge spreads slowly enough that it never threatens Imperial stability. We serve as controlled outlet for information that cannot be entirely eliminated." He smiles slightly. "We are the pressure valve that prevents explosive revelation. The Imperium allows us to exist because our careful, patient preservation of truth serves their interests better than our suppression would. It is an unusual arrangement, but it works. Lisa nods slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. And the price? What will this cost me? Isolation, Matthias says honestly. You will never be able to be completely honest with colleagues about what occupies your thoughts. You will carry knowledge that creates distance between yourself and others, awareness of truths they neither possess nor desire. You will find prayer difficult, faith complicated by understanding of uncomfortable realities, and you will always be aware that you possess information that could get you killed if you mishandle it. But, he continues, you will also know that you serve truth in its purest form, that you maintain historical accuracy against forces that would prefer comfortable lies, that you are part of a tradition extending back 10,000 years, historians who have guarded this knowledge across empires and epochs. There is meaning in that, purpose that transcends personal comfort. Lisa sits in silence for several minutes, the data chip resting in her palm. Matthias does not rush her, understanding that this decision will define the remainder of her life. She deserves time to consider it properly. Finally, she looks up, meeting his eyes with determination that makes him proud. Teach me. Show me how to preserve this knowledge without drawing attention. Help me become what you have been, a guardian of dangerous truth. Matthias feels relief mixed with sorrow. Relief that his work will continue, that the knowledge he has preserved will not die with him. Sorrow that he has just burdened this young woman with weight she cannot fully understand yet, that he has set her on a path that will bring more pain than satisfaction. But it is necessary. The Second and 11th Legions deserve to be remembered. Their Primarchs' discoveries, however terrible, deserve preservation, and humanity deserves to have historians willing to maintain truth even when that truth proves dangerous. Then let us begin, he says. You have much to learn, and I have perhaps a decade to teach it. We should not waste time. Over the following years, Matthias trains Lisa in the subtle art of preserving forbidden knowledge. He shows her how to encode information in seemingly innocuous documentation, how to create trails that only dedicated researchers will discover, how to maintain the appearance of normal function while working toward goals that cannot be openly acknowledged. She proves an exceptional student, surpassing even his expectations. Her documentation begins showing the same careful patterns his own work displays, subtle hints and suggestions woven throughout legitimate archival projects. She identifies other promising students, beginning to build her own network of potential future guardians. The knowledge spreads slowly but surely, maintained by a growing conspiracy of historians who understand both its importance and its danger. Each generation passes on what they know to carefully selected successors, ensuring the truth survives while never becoming widely enough known to threaten Imperial stability. The Second and 11th Legions remain officially lost. Their Primarchs stay forgotten in public memory. But in the shadows of the archives, in the work of dedicated historians across centuries, their story endures, incomplete, fragmented, accessible only to those willing to search for it, but preserved nonetheless. And that preservation, Matthias comes to understand in his final years, represents the only victory available against the forces of institutional suppression. Not revelation, not vindication, but simple persistence. The stubborn refusal to let truth die completely, to maintain knowledge against the preferences of power to ensure that future generations can discover what past generations decided to hide. It is enough. It has to be enough. Because in the end, that is all any guardian of truth can achieve in a galaxy where knowledge itself can serve as weapon, where certain facts prove too dangerous for widespread dissemination, where the choice between truth and stability sometimes demands that stability wins. The lost legions are not forgotten, not completely, not as long as historians like Matthias and Lisa work to preserve their memory, to maintain trails through the darkness, to ensure that those who seek truth with sufficient dedication can eventually find it, even if that truth comes at terrible cost. 23 years after his initial investigation, Matthias Corvane feels the accumulated weight of age more than ever before. His body, sustained through multiple rounds of rejuvenate treatments that have long since reached their effectiveness threshold, protests every movement. His hands shake when holding a stylus. His eyes require constant augmentation to read the ancient texts he catalogues, and his joints ache with the deep pain of systems that have exceeded their designed lifespan. But his mind remains sharp, honed by decades of careful work, preserving knowledge that cannot be openly acknowledged. He has trained 17 students in the art of maintaining dangerous truth, creating a network of historians across Terra's vast archive system who understand what they protect and why it matters. The knowledge of the lost legions survives not through any single guardian, but through distributed preservation that ensures no single point of failure can eliminate it entirely. Lisa Caney, now 41 years old and elevated to senior Remembrancer status, has surpassed even Matthias's own achievements. Her documentation shows sophistication he could never quite manage, encoding information at multiple levels of subtlety that serve different audiences. Casual readers find her work thorough but unremarkable. Dedicated scholars notice patterns that suggest deeper investigation might prove fruitful, and those specifically looking for knowledge of the lost legions discover trails carefully constructed to lead them toward understanding. She visits Matthias in his quarters most evenings now, ostensibly for professional consultation, but truly to check on his declining health. They speak of archival matters, of students showing promise, of techniques for preserving knowledge across generations. But tonight, Lisa's expression carries particular gravity that suggests something more significant requires discussion. Master Corvane, she begins, settling into the chair beside his bed where he increasingly spends his days. I have been contacted by Inquisitor Kestrel. The name triggers immediate recognition. Matthias has not heard from Kestrel directly in over a decade, though he remained aware that his work continued under her observation. What did she want? To speak with me about the work we do, about the knowledge we preserve. Lisa's voice carries careful neutrality. She knows, Master, not just suspects, but knows exactly what we maintain and how we maintain it. She has been monitoring our network for years. Matthias feels neither surprise nor fear at this revelation. He has long suspected that the Inquisition possess comprehensive awareness of their preservation efforts. And what did she say? That our work serves the Imperium's interest better than we might realize. That by maintaining this knowledge in controlled fashion, we prevent more dangerous forms of discovery. She compared us to, Lisa hesitates, to a firebreak. Controlled burn that prevents catastrophic wildfire. The metaphor strikes Matthias as uncomfortably accurate. Their careful preservation of forbidden knowledge does serve containment function, channeling curiosity into manageable investigation, rather than allowing it to explode into uncontrolled revelation. The Inquisition tolerates their work not despite its nature, but because of it. She also said, Lisa continues, her voice softening, that you will not survive another month, that your rejuvenate treatments have failed completely, and your body is beginning final shutdown. She wanted me to know, so I could prepare for transition of responsibility. The news does not shock Matthias. He has felt death approaching for weeks now, his body's systems failing in ways that no medical intervention can reverse. At 73 years subjective age, sustained perhaps 30 years beyond natural lifespan through treatments that have extracted terrible price, he has lived longer than most citizens of the Imperium can hope for. She's correct, he acknowledges. I can feel it. Another few weeks at most. My work is complete, or as complete as it can be, within one lifetime. Lisa's composure cracks slightly, tears forming in her eyes. Master, I'm not ready. There is so much I still need to learn from you, so much knowledge only you possess. You are ready, Matthias assures her gently. You have been ready for years. Everything I know, I have taught you or encoded in documentation you can access. The network we built will survive my passing. The knowledge will endure. That is all any guardian can hope to achieve. He reaches out with trembling hand, grasping hers with what strength remains. You will train your own students, Lisa. Some are probably already showing promise in your classes. You will pass on what you know, as I passed it to you, and they will continue the work after you are gone. That is how truth survives across millennia, not through individual heroes, but through patient succession of dedicated guardians. But the burden, Lisa whispers. Some days it feels crushing, knowing what I know, unable to speak of it openly, constantly aware that I possess information that could get me killed. I know, Matthias says, understanding her pain intimately. I have carried that burden for decades. It does not grow lighter, but it matters. That is what you must remember when the weight feels unbearable. This work matters. The lost legions deserve to be remembered. Their Primarchs' discoveries, however terrible, deserve preservation. And humanity deserves to have historians willing to maintain truth even when truth proves dangerous. He closes his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. There is something else I must tell you. Something I have never shared with anyone, not even you until now. Lisa leans closer, her attention complete. The data chip I gave you 15 years ago, Matthias continues, his voice growing weaker, contains more than just information about the lost legions. Hidden within its encoding is a comprehensive analysis of why the Emperor's decision to erase them was both necessary and tragic. I spent 2 decades developing that analysis, incorporating everything I learned about the nature of the threats they discovered. The Second Legion found proof that the Emperor himself is connected to the warp in ways that contradict his own ideology. They documented evidence that the Imperial truth, that foundational philosophy, claiming the warp held no genuine power, was deliberate deception. Not malicious, perhaps, but certainly misleading. The Emperor knew the warp's true nature, knew the Chaos Gods were real and independent entities, but chose to teach humanity otherwise because he believed that ignorance offered better protection than knowledge. Matthias's breathing grows labored, but he pushes forward, determined to complete this final teaching. The 11th Legion encountered something worse. Entities that exist outside our framework for understanding reality. Not chaos, not Xenos, not any category we possess for comprehending threats, things that are mimetic hazards whose very knowledge creates vulnerability to them. The 11th Legion's final report suggests complete psychological breakdown among warriors who are engineered to be immune to fear. That tells you everything about what they found. So the Emperor erased both legions not as punishment but as quarantine, to prevent knowledge that could not be safely contained from spreading throughout humanity. It was mercy, in its way. Terrible mercy, but mercy nonetheless. He opens his eyes, fixing Lisa with intense gaze that belies his physical weakness. That analysis is what makes our work truly dangerous. Not just preserving knowledge that the Imperium prefers forgotten, but maintaining understanding of why it was forgotten. That context, that comprehension of the Emperor's motivations, could be used to undermine faith in his judgment, to question whether other necessary lies exist, whether the entire Imperial project rests on foundations less solid than doctrine teaches. The Inquisition tolerates our preservation of basic facts about the lost legions, but if that deeper analysis became widely known, if people understood the full implications of what we maintain. He does not finish the sentence, but Lisa's expression shows she grasps the implication. "Why tell me this now?" she asks. "Why not simply let me discover it in the encoded data eventually?" "Because," Matthias says, "you need to understand the true scope of what you guard. You need to know that you are preserving not just historical curiosity, but philosophical challenge to Imperial ideology. That knowledge will help you judge when information can be shared and when it must remain more carefully hidden. Not all truths are equally dangerous. Some can be whispered, others must stay silent for generations more." Lisa nods slowly, absorbing the weight of this revelation. "And after you're gone? After I become the primary guardian of this knowledge, you continue as I have, carefully, patiently, always aware of the consequences. You train students who show promise. You encode information throughout your documentation. You maintain the network of historians who share this burden. And you trust that future generations will value what you preserve enough to continue the work." He smiles slightly despite his pain. "It is not glorious work, Lisa. No one will remember your name as hero or martyr. You will die as I am dying, known only as dedicated remembrancer who served the Imperium faithfully. But in the hidden spaces of the archives, in the trails you leave for future scholars, in the students you train to continue this work, there your legacy will endure. Small legacy, perhaps, but genuine. That is all any of us can hope for. Not revelation, not vindication, but simple persistence. The stubborn refusal to let truth die completely. Exhaustion overwhelms him then, and he drifts into sleep that feels deeper than usual, as if some part of him has begun the final journey toward whatever lies beyond mortal existence. Lisa remains at his bedside through the night, keeping vigil as his breathing grows more labored and his life force slowly ebbs. Matthias does not wake again with full consciousness. Over the following days, he exists in twilight state between life and death, occasionally surfacing to partial awareness before subsiding back into darkness. Lisa stays with him when her duties allow, speaking softly about her work, about students showing promise, about the ongoing preservation of dangerous knowledge. On the final night, as Terra's artificial dawn approaches, Matthias achieves one last moment of clarity. His eyes open, focusing on Lisa's face with recognition and understanding. His lips move, forming words that emerge as barely audible whisper. They are not forgotten. Tell them, not forgotten. And then Matthias Corvane, Remembrancer of the Imperial Archives, guardian of forbidden knowledge, teacher of dangerous truth, dies peacefully in his quarters surrounded by the lifetime of documentation he created. His body fails, but his work survives. The knowledge he preserved endures in distributed fashion across Terra's vast archive system, maintained by students he trained and students they will train in turn. The Second and 11th Legions remain officially lost, their Primarchs stay erased from public memory, but in the careful documentation of dedicated historians, in the subtle trails woven throughout legitimate archival work, in the network of guardians who understand what they protect, there the lost legions live, remembered not in glory or commemoration, but in the persistent refusal to let their existence be completely erased. It is small victory against institutional power that spans 10 millennia, but it is victory nonetheless, and in a galaxy where knowledge itself can serve as weapon, where truth must sometimes hide to survive, such victories represent the only kind available to those who value accuracy over comfort, historical precision over convenient narrative. Matthias understood that, taught it to his students, and passed it forward so that future generations might continue the work he began decades ago in the dusty depths of Terra's archives. The lost legions are not forgotten, not completely, not as long as historians exist who possess the courage to preserve dangerous truth, who maintain trails through darkness, who ensure that knowledge survives even when it must remain hidden. And that, in the end, is the only immortality available to those who serve truth in an empire built on necessary lies. Lysa Caney stands before the assembled students in her lecture hall. 23 young remembrancers who represent the best prospects from the latest training cohort. They regard her with a mixture of respect and curiosity that any effective teacher cultivates, unaware that several among them will eventually be invited into knowledge that will define the remainder of their lives. 5 years have passed since Master Corvane's death, 5 years during which Lysa has proven herself worthy of the responsibility he entrusted to her, expanding the preservation network while maintaining the careful balance between accessibility and security that keeps inquisitorial tolerance intact. Today's lecture concerns methodology for authenticating Great Crusade era documents, standard curriculum material that every remembrancer must master. But as she speaks, Lysa weaves in subtle demonstrations of the techniques Matthias taught her. How to recognize gaps in numbering sequences, how to identify formatting anomalies that suggest deletion, how to cross-reference disparate sources to reconstruct information that has been systematically removed. To most students, these appear as simple professional skills, tools for thorough historical research. But 3 students in the back row show heightened attention at specific moments, their expressions suggesting they recognize patterns beyond what Lysa explicitly teaches. These 3, Marcos Thane, Sarah Valdez, and Chen Ramirez, have shown promise throughout their training. Intelligence combined with curiosity, thoroughness paired with appropriate skepticism, exactly the qualities that mark potential guardians of dangerous knowledge. After the lecture concludes, Lysa observes how these 3 linger, examining reference materials she deliberately placed on display. An old fleet manifest showing gap in legion numbering, a campaign summary with suspicious formatting breaks, a personnel roster missing entries where logic suggests command positions should appear. They notice, they question, they begin connecting patterns. Over the following weeks, Lisa watches their development carefully. Marcos demonstrates exceptional skill at cross-referencing documents, his analytical mind perfect for reconstructing information from scattered fragments. Sarah possesses unusual courage, willing to pursue uncomfortable questions that others avoid. Chen shows remarkable discretion, capable of maintaining secrets even under casual interrogation by curious peers. They are ready, or as ready as anyone can be, for burden that will follow them for life. Lisa arranges individual meetings with each, ostensibly for academic consultation. But the conversations quickly move beyond standard curriculum into territory where only those willing to walk dangerous paths venture. She gauges their responses to increasingly pointed questions, assesses their capacity for bearing dangerous knowledge, evaluates whether they possess not just intelligence but wisdom to understand when truth serves humanity and when it threatens it. All three pass her careful vetting, and so, 6 months after beginning her observation, Lisa invites them to a private study for a conversation that will change everything. You have each noticed irregularities in Great Crusade records, she begins, without preamble, once they are assembled. Gaps in legion numbering, formatting anomalies, missing command positions. You have each begun asking questions about what those gaps represent. Before you pursue those questions further, you must understand what you risk discovering. The three students exchange glances, their expressions showing mixture of excitement and trepidation. They sense this moment's significance, even if they cannot yet grasp its full implications. Lisa tells them everything. She relates Matthias Corvane's original investigation, his discovery of documents proving the Second and 11th Legion's existence, his capture and memory modification, his decision to preserve forbidden knowledge despite consequences. She explains the Emperor's order to erase his own sons from history, the terrible discoveries that necessitated that erasure, the ongoing inquisitorial observation of those who maintain this knowledge. As she speaks, she watches their reactions carefully. Marcus's analytical mind works through implications, connecting pieces with visible precision. Sarah's expression shifts from shock to determination, her courage rising to meet the challenge. Chen's face shows troubled understanding, grasping immediately the burden this knowledge represents. When Lisa finishes, silence fills her study for long minutes. Outside, Terra continues its eternal routine, billions unaware that in this small room, dangerous truth passes from one generation to the next. "Why tell us?" Sarah finally asks, her voice steady despite evident emotion. "Why burden us with this knowledge?" "Because," Lisa responds, "the knowledge must survive. Master Corvane trained me to continue his work. I must train others to continue mine. You three have shown you possess the necessary qualities: intelligence to understand, discretion to preserve, courage to maintain truth despite risks. That makes you candidates to become guardians, as Matthias and I have been." "Guardians," Marcos repeats, testing the word, "of knowledge the Imperium explicitly forbids." "Of knowledge the Imperium cannot completely suppress," Lisa corrects. "There is a difference. The Inquisition knows what we do. They tolerate it because our careful preservation prevents more dangerous forms of revelation. We serve as controlled outlet for curiosity that cannot be entirely eliminated." Chen speaks for the first time, his quiet voice carrying weight. "And if we refuse, if we decide this knowledge is too dangerous to preserve, then you leave this room and never speak of this conversation again." You continue your careers as normal remembrancers, unburdened by secrets you did not choose to carry. I will not judge you for that choice. It might be the wiser path. She leans forward, her gaze moving across all three. But you will spend your careers knowing that truth exists which you chose not to preserve. Questions you decided not to pursue. For some people, that burden weighs heavier than any knowledge could. The students consider this in silence. Lisa gives them time, understanding that this decision will define the remainder of their lives. She sees her younger self in their struggle, remembers making the same choice in Matthias's study decades ago. Marcos speaks first. I want to learn. I want to understand what happened to the lost legions and why their memory was suppressed. I accept the risks. Sarah nods agreement. Truth matters more than comfort. If this knowledge deserves preservation, then I will help preserve it. Chen remains silent longer, his expression troubled. Finally, he meets Lisa's eyes with decision. I will join you, but I need time to understand the full scope of what we're protecting before I begin encoding it in my own work. That is reasonable, Lisa acknowledges. The work requires patience. You will spend years learning techniques before you begin actively preserving knowledge. This is not sprint, but marathon that will last your entire careers. Over the following months, Lisa trains her 3 students in the subtle art Matthias taught her. She shows them how to encode information at multiple levels of complexity, how to create trails that serve different audiences, how to maintain appearance of normal function while pursuing goals that cannot be openly acknowledged. The network grows. Beyond these 3, Lisa has cultivated relationships with remembrancers in other archive facilities across Terra, and even on other worlds. Some possess full knowledge of what they preserve. Others maintain partial awareness, enough to recognize patterns and follow trails, but not enough to make them dangerous if interrogated. Still, others simply practice the methodology without understanding its deeper purpose. Their thorough documentation inadvertently preserving information that more knowledgeable guardians can later utilize. This distributed structure provides redundancy against suppression. No single guardian's capture or death can eliminate the knowledge. No single archive's destruction can erase all evidence. The information exists in fragments scattered across the Imperium's vast administrative infrastructure, preserved by dozens of historians who understand at varying levels what they protect and why it matters. And always, the Inquisition observes, Lisa receives periodic messages from Kestrel or her agents, subtle confirmations that their work continues under watchful eyes. The tolerance extends because the Inquisition understands that complete suppression proves impossible. Better to allow control preservation that can be monitored than to drive guardians underground where their activities might become unpredictable. It is an unusual arrangement, a tacit agreement between those who value truth and those who manage it. The guardians preserve knowledge with care. The Inquisition monitors without interfering. And the dangerous truth survives in careful balance, accessible to those dedicated enough to search for it, but never spreading widely enough to threaten Imperial stability. Years pass. Lisa's students become teachers themselves, training their own successors in the art of maintaining forbidden knowledge. The network expands across Terra's archival infrastructure and beyond, reaching Forge worlds and Cardinal worlds, military archives, and administratum repositories. Everywhere, careful historians work to preserve fragments of truth about the lost legions, maintaining trails through documentation, that future generations can follow. The Second and 11th Legions remain officially forgotten. No public monuments commemorate them. No battle honors preserve their names. The vast majority of Imperial citizens live and die without ever learning they existed. But in the hidden spaces of archives, in the coded documentation of dedicated historians, in the network of guardians who understand what they protect, there, the lost legions endure. Lisa sometimes reflects on the strange nature of this victory. It is not the revelation she might have imagined in younger days, not the grand exposure of truth that sets history straight. Instead, it is patient maintenance, careful preservation, the slow accumulation of evidence that might someday coalesce into understanding. But perhaps that is the only kind of victory available in a galaxy where knowledge itself can serve as weapon, where certain truths prove too dangerous for widespread dissemination, where the choice between accuracy and stability sometimes demands that stability wins, but where historians can still work to ensure accuracy survives, hidden but preserved, waiting for generations ready to handle it safely. The work continues, the network grows, and the Lost Legion's memory endures in the only way it can, not in glory or commemoration, but in the persistent refusal of dedicated historians to let truth die completely, even when that truth must remain hidden for millennia more. The news of Robert Guilliman's resurrection and return to active leadership of the Imperium reaches Terra's archives like seismic shock through the entire administrative infrastructure. A Primarch, one of the Emperor's own gene-forged sons, has returned after 10,000 years to lead humanity's defense against the Great Rift and the forces that pour through it. Felisa Kane, now 58 years old, and recognized as one of Terra's foremost authorities on Great Crusade history, the news carries particular weight. Guilliman was there when the Second and 11th Legions were erased from history. He knows what happened to his lost brothers, why they were removed, what terrible knowledge necessitated their erasure, and he has maintained silence about it for 10 millennia. Will he continue that silence now? Or might his return create opportunity for truth to finally emerge? The question consumes Lisa and her network of guardian historians. For the first time in living memory, someone exists who possesses complete, authoritative knowledge of the Lost Legion's fate. Someone who could, with single declaration, confirm everything the Guardians have worked decades to preserve, or who could deny it all, declaring their careful documentation to be speculation without merit. Lisa receives unexpected summons 3 months after Guilliman's return. The message arrives through official channels, bearing seals that indicate it originates from the Primarch's own staff. She is requested to attend a private consultation regarding historical documentation of the Great Crusade era. The meeting will take place in the Ultramarines Palace archives, where she first encountered Brother Librarian Ferrus decades ago. Her hands tremble slightly as she prepares for the meeting, aware that this could represent either validation of her life's work or its complete destruction. Guilliman could order comprehensive suppression of everything she has preserved, could direct the Inquisition to eliminate the network she has built, could declare that the dangerous knowledge she maintains represents heresy that requires extermination. Or he could acknowledge it, could confirm that the Lost Legions existed, that their erasure served necessary purpose, that maintaining careful memory of them does not threaten Imperial stability. The Ultramarines Archive Tower appears unchanged from her first visit decades ago, though guards now include Primarchs Marines whose enhanced physiology makes even veteran Space Marines seem diminished. They escort her through halls decorated with battle honors spanning 10,000 years, past chambers where the returned Primarch coordinates humanity's defense against threats that would have been unimaginable when he last walked among mortals. The meeting chamber proves smaller than Lisa expected, intimate space designed for private conversation rather than formal consultation. And within it waits not staff members or administrators, but Robut Gilliman himself. The Primarch rises as she enters, his enhanced stature making even the enlarged Space Marine furniture seem modest. He wears the armor of fate, that Xenos-augmented relic that sustains his resurrected life, its ceramite surface bearing scars from battles already fought since his return. But his face, that gene-crafted visage combining human features with transhuman perfection, shows neither hostility nor judgment, only careful assessment and what might be recognition. Remembrancer Matthias, his voice carries the particular resonance of Primarch physiology, each word precisely articulated. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Lisa settles into the indicated chair, her historian's mind automatically cataloguing details while her conscious thought struggles with the reality of sitting before one of the Emperor's sons. This is what Matthias worked toward, what their entire network has preserved across generations. The moment when someone with authority might finally acknowledge the truth they have guarded. I have reviewed your documentation, Gilliman continues, gesturing to a stack of data slates that Lisa recognizes as copies of her work. Your historical analysis of Great Crusade fleet deployments, command structures, logistical patterns, remarkable scholarship, thorough, meticulous, and notable for what it carefully does not say. He leans forward slightly, his enhanced eyes fixing on her with intensity that makes her feel simultaneously terrified and strangely safe. You have spent decades documenting gaps in historical records, creating trails that lead careful researchers toward understanding of events that official history does not acknowledge. You maintain a network of historians who preserve knowledge deemed too dangerous for general dissemination. You know about the Second and 11th Legions, about my lost brothers who are not spoken of, about their terrible discoveries and the necessity of their erasure. It is not accusation, but statement of fact. Lysa finds her voice despite the weight of this moment. Yes, my Lord Primarch, I know, and I have worked to preserve that knowledge, carefully and discreetly, so that truth survives even when it must remain hidden. Gilliman studies her for a long moment before responding. When he speaks, his voice carries sadness that 10,000 years have not diminished. They were my brothers, not in the biological sense that humans understand brotherhood, but in ways that transcend mere genetics. We were created together, fought together, built the Imperium together. And when he pauses, pain evident even in transhuman features, when they fell, not to betrayal like Horus, not to corruption like Lorgar, but to simple exposure to truths that broke them. My father, the Emperor, decided their memory must be erased, completely, as if they had never existed, as if their achievements, their sacrifices, their very existence was too dangerous to acknowledge. He rises, moving to the chamber's viewport that overlooks Terra's sprawling cityscape. I maintained that silence for 10,000 years, through the heresy, through the scouring, through all the long centuries when I slept in stasis, because I understood why it was necessary, because I knew what they discovered and recognized that humanity could not safely possess that knowledge. But I also knew, he continues, turning back to face Lisa, that complete erasure proves impossible, that curious minds would eventually notice the gaps, would pursue the questions, would reconstruct fragments of truth through patient scholarship. And I wondered what would happen when they did, whether the Inquisition would suppress them brutally, or whether wisdom would prevail and allow controlled preservation. Your network, he says, represents that wisdom. You maintain dangerous knowledge without actively disseminating it. You preserve truth carefully enough that the Inquisition tolerates your work. You have created exactly what I hoped might eventually emerge. Guardians who understand both the importance of historical accuracy and the necessity of careful handling. Relief washes through Lisa so intensely she feels momentarily dizzy. Then, you approve? You will not order suppression of our work. I approve of your methodology. Gilliman clarifies. Your discretion, your patience, your understanding that some truths must be whispered rather than shouted. But I must also tell you something that may prove difficult to hear. He returns to his seat, his expression becoming more grave. The knowledge you preserve is incomplete. You understand that my brothers were erased, but not the full scope of what they discovered. The Second Legion found proof about my father's nature that, if widely known, could shatter faith in his divinity. The 11th Legion encountered entities in the void that exist outside any framework we possess for understanding reality. Both discoveries were mimetic hazards, ideas that create vulnerability through mere awareness. But there is more, something I have never told anyone, not even my brothers who survived, something that makes their erasure even more tragic than you might imagine. Lisa leans forward, every instinct as historian demanding she learn this final piece of the puzzle she has worked decades to reconstruct. My lost brothers, Gilliman says quietly, did not simply discover dangerous knowledge. They were destroyed by it. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, but literally. The truths they learned broke their minds beyond any possibility of recovery. My father, the Emperor, in his wisdom, or perhaps his mercy, ended their suffering. And then he erased their memory to prevent others from following the same path, from exposing themselves to knowledge that would break them as it broke his sons. Their legions were not punished. They were quarantined. Those warriors whose minds had not been compromised were mind-wiped and redistributed to other legions. Those who could not be saved were granted the Emperor's mercy, and all record of what happened was destroyed to prevent others from seeking the same knowledge that had destroyed my brothers. The full horror of it settles over Lisa like physical weight, not martyrdom, not sacrifice in conventional sense, but literal destruction of consciousness, minds broken beyond repair by exposure to truths that human cognition, even enhanced as Primarchs possessed it, could not safely process. So when you preserve knowledge of my lost brothers, Gilliman continues, you preserve memory of tragedy beyond anything official histories contain. You maintain record of the price paid for seeking certain truths, of the dangers that exist in pursuing understanding without limit. That is why I approve of your work, not because it challenges imperial authority, but because it serves as warning, as reminder that some questions genuinely should not be asked, some paths genuinely should not be walked. He stands again, moving toward the door to indicate the meeting's conclusion. Continue your work, Remembrancer Matthias. Preserve what you have learned. Train your students to maintain this knowledge, but ensure they understand not just what happened to the lost legions, but why. Ensure they comprehend that this is not a story of injustice, but tragedy. My brothers fell not to betrayal, but to the universe's fundamental hostility to human comprehension. That lesson, he says, his voice carrying weight of 10 millennia, may be the most important thing you preserve. Lisa stands as well, her mind still processing implications of everything Guilliman has revealed. My Lord Primarch, may I ask one final question? He inclines his head, granting permission. Their names, your lost brothers' names, those were erased more completely than anything else. Would you tell me their names, so that we might remember them properly? Guilliman's expression becomes sorrowful. I cannot. The names themselves were part of what was dangerous. They carried weight, resonance, connections to truths that should not be spoken. My father ensured that even those of us who knew them, would eventually lose certainty about what they were called. The names fade like dreams upon waking, leaving only the memory that something once existed there. So no, he says gently, I cannot tell you their names, because I no longer remember them with certainty. And perhaps that is the most complete erasure of all, to be forgotten not just by history, but by those who loved you, to become not even memory, but absence where memory should be. He places a massive hand on Lisa's shoulder, the gesture carrying surprising gentleness. But you will remember that they existed. You will maintain knowledge that 2 of my father's sons discovered truths too terrible to bear, and were granted mercy in their ending. You will ensure that their tragedy serves as warning to future generations about the limits of safe inquiry. That is remembrance of a kind. Not what they deserved, perhaps, but all that can be safely preserved. The meeting ends. Lisa exits the Ultramarines Archive Tower in late afternoon light, her mind churning through everything Guilliman revealed. She has received validation she never expected, acknowledgement from the highest possible authority that her work serves necessary purpose. But she has also learned that the truth she preserved remains incomplete, that the full horror of the lost Primarch's fate exceeds anything she imagined. They were not simply erased, they were destroyed, broken by knowledge that proved toxic to consciousness itself. And their memory was suppressed not to hide embarrassing failure, but to prevent others from following paths that led only to obliteration of self. That night, in her private study, Lisa updates the hidden documentation that serves as core of the preservation network. She adds Guilliman's revelations, encodes his confirmation that the work serves necessary purpose, records the final tragic detail that the lost Primarchs were casualties not of war, but of cognition's limits. The Second and 11th Primarchs will remain nameless. Their specific discoveries will stay mysterious, but their tragedy will be preserved, their warning maintained, their memory kept alive in the only way that serves both truth and safety. And Lisa Caney, guardian of dangerous knowledge, teacher of careful preservation, continues the work that Matthias Corvane began and that future generations will carry forward. The lost legions are remembered, not in glory, not in detail that could prove dangerous, but in acknowledgement that they existed, that they fell, and that their fate demonstrates truths about reality that humanity must recognize without fully comprehending. It is enough. It has to be enough. because sometimes the most important historical preservation is not of facts, but of warnings, not of details, but of lessons, not of complete truth, but of safe portions of truth that can guide future generations away from paths that lead only to destruction. The work continues, the knowledge survives, and the lost Primarchs, though nameless and mysterious, are not forgotten. 37 years after Matthias Corvane's death, the Preservation Network has become institution in its own right, spread across multiple worlds and archive facilities, maintained by over 60 historians who possess varying levels of knowledge about what they protect. The network ensures that truth about the lost legions survives in distributed fashion that no single suppression effort could eliminate. Lisa Kane, now 73 years old and approaching the limits of what rejuvenate treatments can sustain, has begun contemplating her own mortality and the transition of responsibility to the next generation. Her 3 primary students, Marcos Thane, Sarah Valdis, and Chen Ramirez, have all proven themselves worthy successors, each bringing unique strengths to the preservation work. Marcos has developed unprecedented sophistication in encoding techniques, creating multi-layered documentation that serves different audiences at different levels of comprehension. His work represents technical excellence that surpasses even Matthias's original methodology. Sarah has built extensive networks across multiple archive facilities, cultivating relationships with historians on dozens of worlds who contribute to preservation effort without necessarily understanding its full scope. Her organizational genius has expanded the network's reach beyond anything Lisa achieved alone. Chen has focused on theoretical foundation, developing comprehensive analysis of why the knowledge must be preserved and how it can be maintained safely. His philosophical framework guides newer guardians in understanding the balance between preservation and security. Together, they represent the future of the work Matthias began 7 decades ago. And today, Lisa has summoned them to a study for a conversation that will formalize their assumption of leadership responsibilities. "You know why I've asked you here," she begins without preamble, once all 3 are seated. "My rejuvenate treatments are failing. I have perhaps 5 years remaining, possibly fewer. The time has come to ensure a smooth transition of responsibility." The 3 exchange glances, their expressions showing mixture of sadness and determination. They have anticipated this moment, prepared for it, but facing it directly still carries emotional weight. "Each of you," Lisa continues, "has developed expertise that makes you essential to the network's continued function. Marcos, your technical skills ensure our encoding methods remain ahead of any suppression efforts. Sarah, your organizational abilities maintain the distributed structure that provides our primary defense against elimination. Chen, your theoretical framework helps newer guardians understand why this work matters and how to approach it wisely." She leans forward, her aged eyes moving across them with intensity. "But more important than individual skills is your collective understanding of this work's nature. You comprehend that we are not rebels against Imperial authority. We are not heretics pursuing forbidden knowledge for its own sake. We are historians maintaining accurate record of events that official doctrine prefers obscured. There is crucial difference. The Inquisition tolerates our work," she reminds them, "because we maintain that distinction. We preserve dangerous truth without actively disseminating it. We create trails for dedicated researchers without broadcasting discoveries to general populations. We serve as controlled outlet for curiosity that cannot be entirely suppressed. That balance, she emphasizes, is what you must maintain after I am gone. Too aggressive, and you invite suppression. That could destroy decades of work. Too passive, and the knowledge might fade entirely. Our preservation efforts proving insufficient to ensure survival across generations. Walking that line requires wisdom that extends beyond simple technical competence. Marcos speaks first, his analytical mind working through implications. What specific guidance can you offer? How do we judge when we approach the line too closely? Pay attention to inquisitorial signals, Lisa advises. Messages will come, subtle indications of when you are approaching boundaries. Learn to recognize those warnings and adjust accordingly. Inquisitor Kestrel and her successors understand what we do. They will communicate when course corrections become necessary. Also watch your students carefully. Not everyone possesses temperament for this work. Some historians, however intelligent, lack discretion necessary for maintaining dangerous knowledge. Others possess discretion, but lack courage to preserve truth that authorities prefer buried. Finding individuals who balance both qualities is rarest and most essential skill you will develop. Sarah raises a question. And recruitment? How actively should we seek new guardians versus waiting for them to discover patterns on their own? Both approaches have value, Lisa responds. Some guardians emerge naturally, their curiosity leading them to notice gaps and pursue questions. Others require more active cultivation, gentle guidance toward discovery they might otherwise miss. Use judgment, trust instincts developed through years of observation, and remember that slow growth proves more sustainable than rapid expansion. Chen contributes his concern. What about documentation? Should we continue encoding knowledge in the same ways, or should we develop new methodologies to stay ahead of potential suppression efforts? Evolution is necessary, Lisa acknowledges. Marcos has already begun developing more sophisticated encoding techniques. Those should be taught to newer guardians, but do not abandon traditional methods entirely. Multiple approaches provide redundancy. If one methodology becomes compromised, others remain functional. The conversation continues for hours, covering every aspect of the preservation network's operation. Lisa shares decades of accumulated wisdom about managing dangerous knowledge, about training students, about maintaining balance between preservation and security. She provides access codes to hidden archives, introduces protocols for secure communication, details relationships with key contacts across multiple facilities. As evening approaches and their discussion nears conclusion, Lisa withdraws the data chip that Matthias gave her 40 years ago. The same chip that has passed through her hands countless times, that has been updated with each generation's discoveries, that represents the core repository of preserved knowledge. This, she says, holding it up, contains everything we know about the lost legions, Matthias's original research, my 4 decades of additions, recent revelations from Lord Gilliman himself, and comprehensive analysis of why this knowledge matters and how it must be handled. She extends it toward the 3 of them. I am passing it to your collective care. No single guardian should possess complete knowledge that provides too obvious target for suppression. Divide it among yourselves. Create additional copies. Distribute them across the network. Ensure that no single point of failure can eliminate our decades of work. Marcos accepts the chip reverently, understanding the weight of what he holds, we will honor Master Corvane's legacy, and yours. The knowledge will survive. It must do more than survive, Lisa corrects gently. It must serve purpose. The Lost Primarchs tragedy warns of dangers inherent in pursuing certain knowledge. That warning may prove crucial for future generations who might otherwise walk similar paths. Preserve not just facts but understanding. Not just what happened but why it matters. The formal transition complete, Lisa leans back in her chair with visible exhaustion. Decades of carrying dangerous knowledge, of training successors, of maintaining careful balance between preservation and security. All of it has extracted price. She is ready for the burden to pass to younger shoulders. I have one final request, she says quietly. When I die, ensure that my documentation continues to be accessible through the network, not as shrine to my memory, but as a resource for future guardians. Everything I learned, every technique I developed, every mistake I made and lesson I drew from it, all should be preserved so that those who follow can benefit from my experience. We will, Sarah promises. Your work will not be forgotten any more than Master Corvane's has been. Over the following years, the transition proceeds smoothly. Marcos, Sarah, and Chen assume increasing responsibility for network operations, while Lisa focuses on final documentation of her accumulated knowledge. She records comprehensive history of the preservation effort, from Matthias's original investigation through her own decades of work to the present day. She catalogues every major decision, every crisis navigated, every lesson learned about maintaining dangerous truth in an empire that prefers comfortable ignorance. The work proves exhausting but satisfying. She understands that her death approaches, can feel her body systems failing despite medical interventions. But she also knows that the knowledge she helped preserve will survive, maintained by capable guardians who understand both its importance and its dangers. Lisa Kane dies peacefully in her sleep at 75 years subjective age, her work complete and her legacy secure. The preservation network continues without missing stride, her three successors implementing the transition plans they developed together. The knowledge survives, distributed across multiple guardians and facilities, encoded in documentation that serves different audiences at different levels of comprehension. The Second and 11th Legions remain officially lost, but their memory endures in the work of dedicated historians who refuse to let truth die completely, who maintain accurate records even when those records must remain hidden, who understand that some knowledge proves too dangerous for general dissemination, but too important to be entirely destroyed. Marcos, Sarah, and Chen train their own students in turn. The network grows, evolves, adapts to changing circumstances while maintaining its core mission. And always, the Inquisition observes, tolerating preservation efforts that serve containment function by preventing uncontrolled revelation. It is strange victory, this careful maintenance of forbidden knowledge, not the triumph of truth over suppression that idealists might imagine, but pragmatic accommodation between those who value historical accuracy and those who manage dangerous information. The arrangement works because both sides recognize necessity. Truth cannot be completely suppressed, but neither can it be carelessly disseminated. So the balance continues, the knowledge survives, and the lost Primarchs, though nameless and mysterious, are remembered by those willing to search for them, not in glory, not in complete detail, but in acknowledgement that they existed, that they fell to dangers inherent in certain inquiries, and that their tragedy warns future generations about limits of safe knowledge. The work that Matthias Corvane began 70 years ago has become an enduring institution, maintained across generations by historians who understand what they protect and why it matters. The lost legions are not forgotten, and perhaps that, in the end, is the only remembrance available in a galaxy where knowledge itself can serve as weapon. The preservation continues, the truth endures, and humanity, even if most remain unaware, benefits from historians willing to maintain dangerous accuracy rather than accepting comfortable ignorance. 2 centuries after Matthias Corvane first noticed gaps in Great Crusade documentation, the preservation network has become a permanent feature of the Imperium's archival infrastructure. Maintained by hundreds of historians across dozens of worlds, encoded in thousands of documents scattered throughout vast administrative systems, the knowledge of the lost legions survives in distributed fashion that no suppression effort could eliminate without destroying significant portions of humanity's historical records. The network's current guardians bear names unknown to most: Thalia Morgan, Davin Cross, Silas Valdane, among others. But each carries forward the tradition established by Matthias and maintained by Lisa. They train students, encode knowledge, maintain careful balance between preservation and security. They understand that their work serves not revelation, but warning, not exposure, but controlled maintenance of dangerous truth. The Imperium itself has changed in these 2 centuries. Primarch Guilliman's return and his vigorous prosecution of the Indomitus Crusade has brought new energy to humanity's defense. The Great Rift still tears reality in half, but Imperial forces have stabilized many fronts, reclaimed lost worlds, established new defensive networks. Hope, that rarest commodity in the 41st millennium, has begun to spread. Yet even with the Primarch returned, even with new Space Marine chapters founded and old ones reinforced, the silence regarding the Second and 11th Legions continues. Guilliman himself maintains it, honoring 10,000-year-old decision made by his father, the Emperor. The lost Primarchs remain nameless, their specific discoveries mysterious, their ultimate fate known only to highest authorities. But their memory survives in the work of dedicated historians, and occasionally that work produces results beyond simple preservation. In the Imperial archives on Terra, a young remembrancer named Cassian Thorne has spent 3 years following trails left by previous guardians. His investigation began innocently, curiosity about gaps in fleet manifests leading him to notice larger patterns. But his dedication has carried him deeper than most, his analytical mind piecing together fragments that individually seem insignificant, but collectively reveal truth that has been carefully hidden. Today, Cassian sits in a reading chamber in sub-level 23, surrounded by documents that have demolished his understanding of Imperial history. He has discovered evidence of the Second and 11th Legion's existence. He has reconstructed timeline of their operations. He has found fragments suggesting terrible discoveries that led to their erasure. And he has come to understand that this knowledge has been deliberately preserved by historians across 2 centuries, maintained as warning rather than revelation. The question before him now is what he will do with what he has learned. He could report his findings to authorities, claiming to have discovered evidence of historical suppression that requires official investigation. That path would likely lead to his capture memory modification, similar to what Matthias experienced, in continuation of the cycle that has repeated across generations. He could ignore what he has found, delete his research, return to normal archival duties unburdened by dangerous knowledge. That path offers safety, comfortable ignorance, release from responsibility he never sought. Or he could choose the third path, to become a guardian himself, to preserve what he has learned, to add his efforts to the network that has maintained this knowledge across 2 centuries. As Cassian considers his options, a servitor approaches with message, data, slate. The communication bears no sender identification, just brief text in High Gothic. You have discovered what others before you have found. The choice ahead of you has been faced by many across 2 centuries. Whatever you decide, understand that you are not alone. Guardians exist who have preserved this knowledge carefully. If you wish to join that tradition, leave indication in your documentation. If you prefer ignorance, simply cease your research. Either choice will be respected. The message provides no further information, but Cassian understands its significance. He is being watched, his investigation noted by those who maintain the preservation network. They are offering him choice, to join their ranks or to walk away without consequence. He thinks about Matthias Corvane, the Remembrancer who started this tradition 2 centuries ago, about Lysa Kane, who expanded it into enduring institution, about dozens of historians across generations who chose to bear burden of dangerous knowledge rather than accept comfortable ignorance. He thinks about the lost Primarchs, those nameless sons of the Emperor whose discoveries broke their minds and whose memory was suppressed to protect humanity from knowledge that could destroy consciousness itself. Their tragedy deserves to be remembered, even if it must be remembered carefully. And Cassian Thorne, 32-year-old Remembrancer with promising career and secure future, makes the same choice that Matthias made 2 centuries earlier. He will preserve what he has learned. He will become a guardian. He will add his efforts to the network that maintains dangerous truth across generations. His documentation that evening includes subtle signals that the watching network will recognize. Specific formatting choices, particular word selections, careful organization that indicates his willingness to join the preservation effort. And within days, he receives contact from current guardians who will train him in techniques developed across 2 centuries. The cycle continues. New guardians emerge as old ones die. Knowledge is passed forward from generation to generation. The network evolves, adapts, survives, and always, the Inquisition observes, maintaining tacit agreement that allows controlled preservation to continue. In the 41st millennium, where humanity fights for survival against countless threats, where knowledge itself can serve as weapon, where truth must sometimes hide to survive, the lost legion's memory endures, not in glory, not in complete detail, but in persistent refusal of dedicated historians to let certain truths die completely. The Second and 11th Primarchs remain nameless, their discoveries stay mysterious. Their ultimate fate is known only to highest authorities, but their existence is documented. Their tragedy is preserved. Their warning endures for future generations who might otherwise pursue knowledge that proves toxic to consciousness. And the preservation, maintained across centuries by historians who understand both its importance and its dangers, represents small but genuine victory against forces that prefer comfortable ignorance to dangerous accuracy. It is not the triumph of truth over suppression that idealists imagine, but it is maintenance of historical record against institutional preference for forgetting. In the end, perhaps that is all any historian can achieve. To preserve what can be preserved, to maintain what must be maintained, and to trust that future generations will value accuracy enough to continue the work. The lost legions are not forgotten. They exist in shadows and silences, in gaps where their presence should appear, in trails carefully maintained across centuries by historians who refuse to let truth die completely. And as long as humans exist who possess curiosity to notice patterns, courage to pursue dangerous questions, and wisdom to preserve answers carefully, the memory will survive. Matthias Corvane began this work 2 centuries ago. Lisa Kane expanded it into enduring institution. Countless guardians across generations have maintained it, and now Cassian Thorne joins their ranks, accepting burden and responsibility that will define remainder of his life. The eternal vigil continues, the knowledge survives, and the lost Primarchs, though erased from official history, endure in the work of dedicated scholars who understand that some truths, however dangerous, deserve preservation, even when that preservation must remain hidden for millennia more, even when the knowledge might never be safely revealed, even when maintaining it costs everything. Because in the end, truth matters. History deserves accurate preservation, and the fallen deserve to be remembered, even if that remembrance must be whispered in shadows rather than proclaimed in light. The work continues, the network endures, and the lost legions, forgotten by billions but preserved by dedicated few, remain part of humanity's story, hidden but not erased, suppressed but not destroyed, lost to most but found by those willing to search, and that, in a galaxy of darkness, represents light of a kind. Small light, perhaps, easily missed, but genuine nonetheless. The light of truth maintained against preference for ignorance. The light of memory preserved against institutional forgetting. The light of historians who refuse to let certain truths die, regardless of cost. The Second and 11th Primarchs are not forgotten, not completely. Not as long as guardians exist who remember to look for what is missing, who ask why certain gaps exist, who preserve knowledge that others prefer buried. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, that persistent curiosity, that dedication to truth, that refusal to accept comfortable ignorance, might be the most dangerous thing of all. But it is also, perhaps, the most human. The quality that has allowed humanity to survive 10,000 years of horror, to maintain civilization against entropy, to preserve knowledge across millennia of darkness. The work that Matthias Corvane began continues in hands of new guardians. The knowledge he discovered survives in network he helped build, and the lost legion's memory endures as he hoped it would. Not forgotten, not completely. Not as long as historians exist who possess courage to seek truth and wisdom to preserve it carefully. The eternal vigil continues, the knowledge survives, and the story of the lost Primarchs, though incomplete and mysterious, remains part of humanity's heritage, hidden in shadows, whispered in silences, preserved by those who understand that some truths, however dangerous, deserve to survive for as long as humanity endures.